We want to work together with the US. We all want to work together with other vibrant economies. We would like to cooperate within the region.
If it's something specific that makes sense that people can see they benefit from, they will support globalization and cooperation. And if the specifics are things they find immensely threatening, they won't.
The power of China today is a fact, and it's a perfectly justifiable fact in the sense of it's a large population country, ancient civilization, huge economy. China is and should be one of the great powers of the world for the 21st century.
It's questionable whether enough preparation has been made. We're preparing very significantly here in Ireland, and we would be the first to admit that there will be challenges even in a normal Brexit.
We need to remain cautious, but there is very good reason for us to be very optimistic. And I truly believe that we will get through this much stronger and also in a much healthier manner.
One of the fundamental outcomes of these 11 months has been that each one of us has been challenged. We've been pushed. We have had to innovate and think through and push forward.
A good deal for us would be a deal where we could import cheaper goods from China, but export our services. And I thought TPP was something where that would have been a helpful start.
COVID-19 is a mirror for mankind that reflects deeper sicknesses in our economies, our societies, and our environment. We can look away, or we can recognize the ailments that threaten our long-term future and build a more sustainable and inclusive world. The agenda for the New Economy Forum is global. It's to challenge government and business leaders to work together in 5 key areas: finance, trade, climate, public health, and cities. This is urgent. Economies are failing. Societies are breaking apart. Our planet is burning.
Firefighters in Southern California struggle to contain a massive blaze.
We embrace technology as part of our solutions. The new economy must be digital. We firmly believe that no problem in the world today can be solved without East-West collaboration. Our perspective is bottom-up. We are all in this together. This is the Bloomberg New Economy Forum.
And now, the founder of the Bloomberg New Economy Forum, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies, and 3-time mayor of New York City, Michael R. Bloomberg.
Welcome to day 2 of the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. We have a full day ahead with great conversations focused on the theme of cities. Cities have historically been centers of tolerance and diversity, education and economic opportunity. They attract dreamers and inventors, and they are engines of innovation. More and more of the world's population lives in cities, so cities will increasingly set the course for our future. But cities also face big challenges. One of them is climate change and the growing threats it presents. Other challenges have been highlighted or worsened by the coronavirus pandemic, like economic and racial inequality. And the economic effects of the pandemic have hurt city budgets and threatened their ability to meet the needs of growing populations. But the good news is, in recent years, a new era of urban innovation has dawned. City leaders are finding creative ways to address big challenges, especially when national governments are slow to act or held back by partisan politics. They are forming partnerships with businesses and with residents, and the pandemic is an opportunity to accelerate that work. The truth is, throughout history, public health crises have helped to jumpstart progress in cities. Past epidemics drew attention to the need for clean water and open air, and led to the creation of modern water and sewer systems in great urban parks and outdoor spaces. And in recent years, more cities have been building bike lanes and mass transit to help address health problems caused by air pollution. Cities have been responding to the coronavirus with bold new ideas too, including new ways to use outdoor space and deliver critical services to vulnerable people. So if we work together and share great ideas, cities can emerge from the pandemic stronger than ever before and help to create a new economy that works for all. Today's a chance to do that. So let's get started.
All right, Mike, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for part one of our second day of the 2020 Bloomberg New Economy Forum. I'm your host, Carol Masser. Now, throughout the day, you will have the opportunity to respond to a series of polls. Please use the buttons below on your screen to submit your opinions and questions. We want to hear from you. And now, please welcome back Michael Bloomberg.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the day. Our next speaker is the Prime Minister of one of the world's biggest and most dynamic economies. He has set ambitious goals for India's growth, and that includes plans that will make the country a world leader in adopting clean energy. He has also shown strong leadership on some of the biggest public health issues we face, like fighting air pollution and combating the spread of e-cigarettes. And this year, he has led the country's response to the biggest global health challenge we have faced in a century, the coronavirus pandemic. So we're honored to have him with us today and to have a chance to hear his insights. Please welcome Prime Minister Modi.
Mr. Michael Bloomberg, thought leaders, captain of industry, distinguished participants of the Bloomberg New Economic Forum, I begin by expressing my appreciation for the great work being done by Michael and his team at Bloomberg Philanthropies. The support provided by this team in designing of India's smart cities mission has been very good. Friends, we are at a very important point in our history. More than half of the world's citizens already live in urban areas. Over the next 2 decades, India and some of the African nations are going to witness the biggest wave of urbanization. But the COVID-19 pandemic has posed enormous challenges before the world. It has shown us that cities which were our growth engines are also our vulnerable zones. Many cities around the world declared themselves on the brink of the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. The very things which represented living in a city are facing a question mark. Things like community gatherings, sports activities, education, and recreations are not the same as before. The biggest question before the entire world is how to restart. The restart will not be possible without a reset of mindset, a reset of processes, and a reset of practices. Friends, I think the historic reconstruction efforts after the two world wars can give us several lessons. Post-World Wars, the entire world worked on a new world order. New protocols were developed and world changed itself. COVID-19 has also given us a similar opportunity to develop new protocols in every field. This opportunity should be grabbed by the world if we want to develop resilient system for the future. We should think on post-COVID requirements of the world. A good starting point would be the rejuvenation of our urban centers. Friends, here I want to share a positive side of Indian cities. Indian cities have presented an extraordinary example during these tough times. There were worldwide incidents of resistance against the lockdown measures. However, Indian cities meticulously followed these preventive measures. This is because for us, the biggest building block of our cities was not concrete, but the community. The pandemic has re-emphasized that our biggest resources as societies and as businesses is our people. The post-COVID world has to be built by nurturing this key and fundamental resource. Cities are vibrant engines of growth. They hold the power to drive this much needed change. People often migrate cities because cities give them work. But isn't it time that we also make cities work for the people? COVID-19 has given a chance to accelerate our process of making cities more livable for people. This includes better housing facilities, better work environment, shorter and efficient travel. During the lockdown, many cities saw cleaner lakes and rivers, as well as cleaner air. So many of us saw the chirping of birds we never noticed before. Can we not build sustainable cities where these features are the norm and not the exception? It has been our endeavor in India to build urban centers which have the amenities of a city, but the spirit of village. Friends, during the pandemic, technology has also helped us maintain continuity in our work. Thanks to a simple tool like video conferencing, I can wrap up many more meetings. This has also helped me bridge the distance and talk to all of you. But this also poses an interesting question for a post-COVID world. Will we continue with the learning of the COVID times, like video conferencing? Or will we travel across continents to participate in a conference? Reducing stress on urban system will depend on our choices. The choices will also help us maintain a better work-life balance. In today's age, empowering people to work from anywhere, to live anywhere, to plug into global supply chains from anywhere is an absolute necessity. That is why we have announced simplified guidelines for the technology and knowledge-enabled service sector. This will facilitate work from home and work from anywhere. Friends, our cities cannot prosper without availability of affordable housing. Realizing this, we launched the Housing for All program in 2015. I am happy to note that we are well on our way. We will deliver more than 1 crore or 10 million houses to aspiring families in urban areas before the targeted deadline of 2022. Looking at the conditions created by the pandemic, we also introduced an affordable rental housing initiative. We created the Real Estate Regulation Act. This has transformed the dynamics of the real estate sector. Also, this has made it more customer-oriented and transparent. Friend, sustainable mobility is key to creating resilient cities. The work on metro rail is going on in 27 cities. We are on track to deliver close to 1,000 kilometers of metro rail system in the country by 2022. Our Make in India push had led to development of tremendous indigenous capacity for production of transportation systems. It is going to help us push our sustainable transport goals in a big way. Friends, technology is an important enabler in the journey of a smart, prosperous, and resilient city. Technology helps manage a city efficiently and build connected communities. We are looking at a future where a major chunk of education, healthcare, shopping, food experiences may happen online. Our cities need to be ready for the convergence of the physical and digital worlds. Our programs, Digital India and Startup India missions are helping create capacities toward this. We have selected 100 smart cities through a two-stage processes. It was a nationwide competition upholding the philosophy of cooperative and competitive federalism. These cities have prepared projects worth almost 2 lakh crore rupees or 30 billion US dollars and projects worth almost 1 lakh 40,000 crore rupees or $20 billion have been completed or nearing completion. To unleash the full potential of technology, integrated command and control centers have been set up in many cities. These centers are currently also serving as war rooms to manage the COVID situation in various cities. Lastly, I would like to remind one thing to all of you. If you are looking to invest in urbanization, India has exciting opportunities for you. If you are looking to invest in mobility, India has exciting opportunities for you. If you are looking to invest in innovation, India has exciting opportunities for you. If you are looking to invest sustainable solutions, India has exciting opportunities for you. These opportunities come along with a vibrant democracy, a business-friendly climate, a huge market, and a government which shall have not stone unturned to make India a preferred global investment destination. Friends, India is well on its way towards urban transformation. I have no doubt that with the help of all stakeholders, the civil society, academic institutions, industry, and most importantly, the citizens and communities, we will achieve the dream of resilient and prosperous global cities. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Well, pandemics have always posed a threat to cities, but time and again, we've seen some of the most innovative improvements to city life emerge in their aftermath. Bloomberg New Economy Forum looks at how the world can look to previous pandemics for clues as to how our post-COVID-19 world is already evolving.
Humanity has faced the challenge of deadly disease for thousands of years. And whenever a new pandemic takes hold, civilizations adapt in response. In the 19th century, cholera epidemics in Europe set off an outcry for investment in modern sanitation and urban renewal. The movement sparked Baron Haussmann's transformation of Paris into the City of Light, trading crowded slums for wide, tree-lined boulevards and monuments lit by gas lamps. Haussmann's modernization prompted cities all over the world to follow suit. London added sewage systems, and New York built Central Park, adding a reservoir and green space for city dwellers to take in fresh air. At the turn of the 20th century, tuberculosis swept through the US, creating a greater need for urban parks and bringing light and air into building designs. The 1918 flu pandemic led to the invention of the radiator, with steam heating systems designed to allow windows to be left open, even during winter months, for improved ventilation. COVID-19 has already intensified a push by cities around the world to reduce pollution by adding bike lanes, pedestrian walkways, and implementing building design changes. Paris is pioneering the idea of a 15-minute city, creating walkable communities of shops, schools, and clinics, reducing the necessity of cars or public transport. In the distant past, it took decades for pandemics to leave their mark on our city's urban design and architectural landscape. Well, the changes sparked by this COVID-19 are already taking shape.
Well, a lot to think about. And our next panel examines how cities are already reinventing themselves for the post-pandemic era. Our speakers are Lord Mayor Hazel of Dublin, Ireland, Edward Glaeser, Professor of Economics at Harvard University, Liang, Chairman of Vanke, Lord Foster, President of the Norman Foster Foundation, and Founder and Executive Chairman, Foster and Partners, and our moderator will be Reuben Abraham, Chief Executive Officer, IDFC Institute. Reuben.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in to this from. Welcome to the City of Lights panel. Just quickly to explain the format, we'll have about 30 minutes of Q&A between me and the panelists, followed by an audience Q&A. So if you have questions, please type it out as the session goes on. There's also a polling question that is being presented to you right now, which you'll have the chance to take. And then at the end of the first part of this program, we will actually see what the respondents have basically said to the polling questions. So with that, I think the organizers have teed it up really well for us with that video that we just saw. So let's jump straight in. We've got very limited time. Brevity is key. So let me just, Ed, let me come to you first. We just saw that video. The last however many months, 6 months, all we've basically heard is, obviously cities have borne the brunt of the COVID pandemic. And so therefore there's been a lot of talk about how, basically the time of cities is over and so on and so forth. But as we saw in that video, that just is not true because this has happened in the past. Do you want to throw a little bit more color to this whole story of pandemics and cities and what we can learn from the past?
I would love to, Reuben. And the truth is that cities and pandemics have a very long history together. They've co-evolved in a sense. If you think back to Athens 2,400 years ago, 2,500 years ago, it's hard to imagine a city that achieved more amazing things. It created history as we know it. It created democracy. It created unbelievable art, philosophy. It really created a new vision of human creativity. But of course, it also created a plague. The backstory for that was, of course, that Pericles had summoned the Athenians inside the city walls to protect them against Spartan foot soldiers and sent out the Athenian navy to harass the Peloponnesian coast. The problem was that while the walls were perfectly effective against hoplites, they were completely ineffective against bacteria, which came into Athens and really doomed Pericles' dreams of victory. 900 years later, Justinian's Constantinople, an attempt to reimpose the Pax Romana on the Mediterranean world. Once again, right, the dreams were toppled. But for the past 650 years, right, cities have been much more resilient against plague, right? For 200 years after the Black Death, urban civilization flourished in the Renaissance. The recurrent pandemics that hit cities throughout the world in the 19th century, yellow fever, then cholera, tuberculosis, as was said, these were opportunities for cities to invest, to reinvent themselves. America's cities and towns were spending as much on clean water and sanitation in 1900 as the national government was spending on everything except for the post office and the army, right? Cities have a remarkable amount of resilience, and we have had a blessed century in which we have not, in fact, featured major pandemics. But we will get through this again, just as we did in the 19th century. And I just want to make one final point on this, which is in some sense, the most important thing that we did in the 19th century was to actually figure out how disease worked. It was John Snow understanding the waterborne nature of cholera. And that really is the lesson going forward, that knowledge is the most important thing that cities create, and it is the most important weapon that we have against pandemic.
Norman, if I can come to you for a second. There's a quote that I found from you, from a speech that you'd given earlier, which is you said, if you want to look far ahead, then first look far back. So do you broadly agree with what Ed said in terms of what we can expect from our cities post-COVID? Or do you expect some changes post-COVID?
No, I totally agree with Ed. The story of pandemics, the story of history, the way in which the city comes back stronger, revitalized, energized, transformed, improved infrastructure. So in part, this idea that you learn from the past, you learn from history, I think is as relevant today as it's ever been. I guess the point is that this pandemic will seem in its aftermath as though it's changed everything. With the perspective of time, of history, it will be seen that it's just magnifying and accelerating trends that were already apparent before the pandemic. Perhaps the thing that is new is the attitude of mind. Some of the things in terms of transformations which might have had a long battle, a long series of debates, would now be much easier to achieve. Pedestrianization of cities, greening of cities, for example, as more space is given over to pedestrians, to citizens.
So both of you are fairly positive about the future of cities post-COVID. Let me just come to Hazel, because Hazel, you actually run a city, and obviously Dublin has been affected. And one of the things that you've kind of proposed is this idea of, I mean, this has also been widely discussed around the world, this idea of a 15-minute city. Do you want to just explain that a little bit? I mean, so if you can also address what Norman and Ed addressed, which is, do you have the same kind of positive view for Dublin post-COVID? And if you can just also briefly explain the idea of the 15-minute city for our viewers.
I totally agree with Norman and Ed. I think this is what humanity is. You have to have faith. You have to understand that in every crisis, there is also an opportunity. And I loathe saying that because there has been so much mourning and so much loss and so much grief. But there is an opportunity there, and you can see it time and time again when we saw it at the offset of this broadcast, the different cities that thrived and took that opportunity and ran with it. And you can see it even now during the pandemic. You look at Lithuania, and Vilnius is the capital that has transformed it's transformed into an open air restaurant almost across their city. It has social distancing, cinemas outdoors. It has wide pedestrianisation across the board. And you see that also in Athens and Milan. For us in Dublin, why I am so keen on a 15-minute city, because we are rolling out what we call COVID mobility measures to protect people, to have safe spaces and safe transport routes for them for cycling and walking. But why I want 15-minute city is the same reason Paris does, is because you need that sense of community as well. Time and time again, we've seen through this pandemic is that community is essential. So in Dublin City alone, what it used to be what I call a donut. So in the centre was this amazing filling, and everything else in the periphery wasn't really looked at, but the centre was. Whereas now it's an inverted donut. It's the donut with a ring and a hole in the center, where everything is now empty in the city center and everything's gone to the periphery. So what we need to do, however, is spread it. Insofar, the city center and also the periphery needs to have this connection, and things need to be within 15 minutes of a community to work, because we've seen that 15-minute city plans do work. If you have schools, if you have work, if you have shops, within that 15 minutes, people travel to it well. It's more sustainable, it's more environmentally friendly, but ultimately, what it does well is it builds community, which is what is the lasting thing that we should take out of this pandemic, is that community about the whole nature of all in it together.
So in effect, what you're saying is whether you live in the core or the periphery. So let me rephrase that. Are you saying that we need to have less of the periphery to core commutes? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, what I'm saying is that donut example I talked about becomes this massive, all over spread of love, shall we say, a perfect donut where every bit is good, because you don't have to then just commute to the center. You don't have to go to the periphery just to benefit either. Every pocket is better urbanly planned so that it becomes a community for each village or town, so that it works better in terms of the system.
So let me just pick up on this, and I'll either you can answer or I'll go to Ed with this, which is, so what do you see as the future of public transit? Because one of the things that has been absolutely hammered during this crisis is public transport. So if you look at any transit system around the world, they're all in trouble, right? So I mean, do you see people coming back to public transit? I mean, what is the future of public transit going to look like? A, post-COVID, and B, if we actually get to a 15-minute city. I know Norman wants to come in as well. I'll come to you. But, you know, what do you see as the future of public transit?
I see that we need more of it, and that's when people would actually take it more, because like every city, as you said, public transit has been decimated, but it's also that fear from people. They don't want to be overcrowded. They don't want the possibility of getting infection, so they don't go for public transport. But that means that you have to have more frequency and you have to have a better service, and things will go back to a new normality as well. If you look, for example, of SARS after Hong Kong after SARS, the public transport was decimated for a period of a good 6 months afterwards. It was only when people realized there's a new normality back, that they became more, relaxed about taking public transport.
Ed, if I could come to you on this, do you foresee yourself taking the New York subway or the Boston tea at 4 p.m. anytime soon?
Anytime soon? Well, I think we're likely to wait until a vaccine, or at least a cure for that. In some sense, this hints at the great tragedy of disease for cities. That ultimately, one of the greatest things about cities is their ability to enhance human sharing. Right? What is an urban restaurant but a shared kitchen, a shared dining room? What is an urban park but a shared backyard? And of course, public transportation is a great example of human beings sharing engines, sharing chassis, sharing tunnels. And they're what makes cities in part so functional and so humane, because they are at the heart of urban collaboration. But they don't work if people are terrified of being next to one another. And I think it really emphasizes the fact that we're going to need to fix the disease before we can actually really trust to public transit to get back. So we've really got to hope that we fix this vaccine and that we manage to make the investments that we really need to make sure that this is a one-off pandemic, that this doesn't happen again anytime soon.
But in effect, what you're saying is people will eventually come back to the transit systems.
They will. Memories are short. People will eventually come back, yes.
Okay. Norman, you wanted to come in on what Hazel was mentioning, and I know specifically you have a great interest in the whole idea of community, for instance. So over to you.
Well, this thing about looking far back to look ahead, the idea of the 15-minute city is not exactly new. I mean, I grew up as a child in Manchester, and there was the equivalent of the high street. Everything except one thing, which was the workplace, was within 15 minutes. But the workplace at that time was pretty dirty and was excluded somewhere else. Incidentally, in London, 90% of the population is within 15 minutes of a high street. So this is a vital and very important rediscovery. I think the importance of zoning to reinforce that, because industry is now clean. It can coexist. It can be within walking distance, close proximity. All of this is about the quality of the high-density city. And there's been enough studies now, scientific studies, to demonstrate that high-density, proximity of people together in a city, that does not mean high infection rates. Quite the reverse. The highest infection rates were in some of the lowest density areas. The improvement in quality of public transport would be towards less density. In other words, if you can sit down rather than have to stand up, if you're not crammed together. So the higher quality public transport will be less dense. So I think that's another trend. And you can see that now in Asia, in Hong Kong. If you take the train out to the airport, it's a super luxurious train. It's not, you're not crammed, everybody, like sardines in a can.
So I want to return to this density question in a bit, but let's just switch over, because everything that we've discussed so far is mostly about the West and the developed West. So I would love to get a perspective from a developing country standpoint, but specifically China. So if I can come to you, Liang. So obviously China was hit by the first wave of COVID. It's one of the few countries since then where the situation has pretty much returned to normal. Yes, borders are closed, but I think by and large, things have returned to normal. Did Chinese cities change in the aftermath of the pandemic? And are there any trends that you've observed since a sort of return to normalcy?
Well, we do see some changes in Chinese cities since the pandemic, but I think that these changes were not caused by the pandemic. They were accelerated or intensified by the pandemic. I think one very obvious prominent point is that we now have multi-centered, multi-tiered, and multi-noded cities appearing now, and they're networked. And so their facilities are more complete, and there are more shared facilities. In the past, we already began to see this tendency of some cities. For instance, in Shenzhen, it slowly changed from a single-purpose industrial zone into a super complex one. And it has a free trade zone, a cruise port, an art center, a coastal leisure corridor. And then there's Lujiazui in Shanghai. It started off being designated to be a financial center with these relatively simple functions. But now it has many more functions. It has art galleries, pedestrian walk, and the place is full of vloggers and web influencers. And so the appearance of this pandemic has stepped up this appearance of multi-centered cities and distributed changes, because these network cities are more ecological, more livable, and they're more resilient. So now, after this post-pandemic, Chinese urban plannings will be more resilient, and they will not be systemic collapse. And we can also see that in city planning, in policies, we want focus on resilience and networking among cities. And there are some very good examples of these. Like in Shenzhen, their park system and their greenway form a very good network. Within 500 meters, citizens can reach the park. And within 5 minutes of bike riding, they can enter the greenway. And 5 minutes drive will bring them into a greenway. Now, normally, this is a good place for sports, for leisure, for entertainment. But if there were to be a pandemic or disaster, this park network becomes a place for disaster prevention, for functions such as isolation and refuges and evacuation and disaster relief. I mentioned Lujiazui just now. They have a terrorist flood prevention post. The lower sanction provides park functions, and it helps mitigate small rains, minor rains, and floods. But the higher section can help mitigate major floods, even a once-in-a-thousand-year flood, and that increases the city's resilience.
Thank you. Ed, if I can come back to you for a second on the density question that Norman touched on as well. One of the things that I think people have conflated during this pandemic, certainly in the reportage that has come out, is exactly what Norman pointed to, which is, this is not necessarily, so if you look even at a place like New York, the place that is least affected in New York City is actually the least dense, which is Manhattan. So is it that people are basically conflating crowding and density?
I think that's right, that there's no problem with having tall towers and being safe. And as you say, certainly within New York City, within the 5 boroughs, the lowest case rates were in downtown Manhattan. The lowest case rates were in the inner portions of Brooklyn. Now, that's partially because the people there were able to switch to telecommuting. They were able to reduce their number of trips. It's really about contact with strangers, not about density. So I don't think we should be frightened of height going forward. We just need to make sure we have protocols in place, science in place to make sure that density doesn't lead towards excessive connection between people who aren't able to protect themselves against the spread of a virus.
Norman, coming to you for a second. So one of the things that, now the bit that we saw in the beginning about, for instance, radiators in New York City and so on. So one of the things that we know certainly with respiratory illness is the requirement for ventilation. And the fact that indoor transmission is a big problem with COVID. And it looks like that is a problem with any sort of respiratory illness. Keeping that in mind, is there sort of a new paradigm within the architectural system that we need to basically think about that actually accommodates for the fact that we need more ventilation, indoor transmission is a problem at times of pandemics and so on?
There have been a lot of studies about healthier buildings, and over many decades, we've pioneered healthier buildings. And the reasoning has been subjective, but those subjective values have now been proven by studies like the Harvard School of Public Health that green buildings are actually proven to improve your concentration, your response to crises, your ability to absorb information. And the kind of buildings we're talking about, interestingly, Bloomberg's own headquarters or the recent Apple headquarters, These are buildings which have a large element of natural ventilation. So the climate is controlled, but the number of air changes is probably 2.5 times that of the traditional sealed air-conditioned box, which is recirculating refrigerated air. So the inclusion of nature, whether that's greenery, whether it's the ventilation, I think the move towards healthier buildings, which has been pioneered by a combination of designers with enlightened individuals who commission, who care about their workforce, that has been a fringe. That, I think, is more likely to be mainstream.
Hazel, I know that a couple of things that that you really care about are around both integration as well as inclusion. So how do we sort of, I'm going to combine this with a really good question that came in from the audience, which is that the 15-minute city is a worthy goal, but how do we ensure that it doesn't become just a luxury for wealthy urban residents, but it also serves poorer residents a great deal more? The audience questioner has actually asked my question in a much better form. So if you could just respond to the whole sort of, how do we make sure that this is inclusionary?
Well, this is the thing. We talk about diversity true and true these days because of the various movements that have happened and happening, like Black Lives Matter, and we talk about the importance of fighting discrimination. But there's a huge difference between having a diversity and having an inclusive city. And your other guests, Ed, Norman, and Liang, all talked about density there, and how in a way density is not bad, especially when it comes to the pandemic. I would like to then dive that into another layer and say that yes, absolutely, density isn't the issue, but what is issue is a class system and also the divide when it comes to the lack of integration when it comes to some communities, because you will see it in Ireland here that the poorer communities, the ones that have factories that have migrants working in it, those are the areas that have high infection rates so far. So to have a proper plan for the next pandemic, if it was to be to happen, you need to have a proper integration strategy that will work for a 15-minute city. So as your questioner rightly asked, how do we prevent it from being a luxury where it just becomes this bubble for wealthy people who can avoid health issues and also have the luxuries of being near their city? The answer to that is a proper integration from grassroots level plan in a city. That's what we're doing. That's what I'm going to be chairing over the next couple of weeks. And it's something I've noticed because coming from a second generation immigrant background, my mom was an immigrant here from Hong Kong 40 odd years ago, and she would have stuck to what she calls her own. And it's like when we all go to cities, we will go spot what is closest to home and we will flock towards those people. That has to be broadened out. You need to have communities within these 15-minute city that values people's culture and where they call home, but also be able to integrate them into the wider community itself. So through a given village, I would want to see food shops from different ethnicity. I would want to make sure that education has built in with them different language and also different religion, because we share a lot of commonalities, but we also need to celebrate the differences we have and celebrate diversity. And that comes from the heart of the community. So a plan that is bottom up is what we need.
So let me ask you a follow-up. Let me ask you a quick follow-up on that, because globally, there's a enormous amount of sort of nativism and resentment that is bubbling over in many countries in the world, and cities are kind of a liberal bastion of liberal values, so to speak, which is partially what you're sort of hinting at. I mean, do you see that sort of? I mean, how do you see that playing out? I mean, because a lot of the political stuff that you see around the world is actually also a conflict between urban versus non-urban values, so to speak. Do you care to comment quickly on that?
So urban and non-urban, but also working class and upper middle class, and it's a class divide as well as a urban versus city divide. And to do that, what you need to start having within housing is a multi-layered housing system where you don't just put social housing or public housing, as we call it, in just one block, and then as more luxurious housing in another block. You need to integrate, and you need to make sure that new housing that gets built has your affordable housing, has your cost rental, has also your social housing, all integrated into it. Because then, in a way, you're almost not giving people a choice. You're saying, listen, you may think your neighbor is different and of a different class system to you, but that doesn't mean they're not good people. And it means that you can share an environment. And the first step is to have them sharing a housing environment to move on to the next step.
Okay. Liang, if I can come to you for a second. I mean, so also, if you have any comments on what the speakers have already spoken, please feel free to comment on that as well. But just, I have a question for you, which is, did the pandemic also change the behavior of people in China? And if yes, how do those changes affect people? How do they affect communities? How do they affect buildings? And of course, how do they affect cities?
Indeed, the pandemic has changed people's lifestyles. And if so, we can see that people has focusing more on the immediate food, clothing, and shelter to a greater focus on long-term health. We have a higher health standard of the buildings. For instance, in the northeastern China, when we built the houses, we have found out that these northeastern parts of China has a high incidence rate of cancer, lung cancer. That's because people stayed a longer time indoor in a window. So we designed the HVAC systems for the buildings. The homeroom air was ventilated every 2 hours, but that was not enough. We added air purification on the system and then heated the air. We hope to provide cleaner, fully ventilated, comfortable, fresh air to the buildings to ensure the health and the good experience of the people living there. Actually, the community can play a very big role in pandemic control. The community can help the city government to control the pandemic in a smaller unit. Self-help and mutual help within the community can alleviate the burden of the city government. For example, in the equipment, we try to use the contact-free system and elevators to reduce the unnecessary contact in the neighborhood, lower the risk of transmission, and provide hassle-free passage to those find the system or elevator difficult to operate, such as elderly and children. We also, during the pandemic control, use a lot of smart equipment and a terminal. Lack of the products or for the seniors and the children, they are not very friendly to them. During the pandemic, we found that they are the ones need special care and protections during the pandemic. So during this process, for the society to be smart, we should take care who needs the most. In the future, we should let the city and community to serve better for the people. And I'm convinced that the city will defeat this virus and pandemic. Thank you.
Perfect. I'd like to ask the organizers to just keep the poll results ready while we go to the next. I'll call for it after this round of questions. So Ed, if I can just come back to you once again on this change of behavior. So the most obvious change of behavior for all of us is what we are doing right now, which is, we're working remotely. What are the implications of remote working for the future of cities? I mean, there was this famous book that was written in the late 90s by a former economist correspondent called The Death of Distance. I mean, is the death of distance truly upon us? I mean, what do you think about remote working?
So this prediction that the death of distance would kill off cities goes back 40 years. goes back to Alvin Toffler and the third wave. And for most of the past 40 years, he's looked completely wrong, right? In the sense that cities have become more vibrant, face-to-face contact has become more important in a world in which knowledge is more important. The technology industry has loved face-to-face connection. They've loved the idea of bringing a whole bunch of young people together and letting them create together, right? All of a sudden, we're now Zooming. And yet, there are reasons to think that this will not be the new normal. On the sort of pro side, we've done a series of polls of business leaders and business economists, and about 40% of businesses say that 40% or more of their workers who switched will stay switched. Moreover, among the workers who switched, many of them seem to have productivity levels that are not all that changed. On the con side, right, no one's hiring in remotable jobs. So while remotable jobs, employment stayed constant, non-remotable jobs, employment crashed. But non-remotable hiring has jumped back up. Remotable hiring is totally gone, which suggests that in some sense, we are coasting on skills, on connections that we made during a period of face-to-face working. Businesses are not hiring new people for these jobs. And in some sense, also, remember, for younger people, right, one part of working is the joy of being around other human beings, and we don't have that. Last point, if the future is remotable, it is a world that is unbelievably unequal. Right, 70% of people with advanced degrees who are employed are now remotable. 5% of people who are high school dropouts are now remotable. This is not something that less skilled people would do. For most of the past 50 years, the one employment safe haven as automation destroyed and outsourcing destroyed factory jobs was the urban service sector, right? Was leisure, hospitality, retail, trade. 20% of American employment, 32 million American workers were in those jobs, and those jobs disappeared. This remotable future is not a future that works for less skilled Americans. And so it is absolutely vital that we make sure that the face-to-face world comes back, and as well it should, because it is a future that face-to-face world is a future that's built around humanity and built around the joy we all take from being around other human beings.
Norman, I'll come to you for the last word on this round, which is, again, just to build off this question of remote work. I mean, the sense of community that you care about so deeply, I mean, is that under threat from remote working?
Yes, I think it is. Or you can turn the thing on its head and say that at a certain point you have exhausted all the potential for the remote working, and you're dying to get back with colleagues in a face-to-face environment to do what you cannot really do in a Zooming environment. Now, I think that you'll see technological advances which will enhance the virtual reality of being together in cyberspace. But in the end, there is no, in my view, substitute for the communality, the social dimension, the same urge that brings people together in an urban restaurant rather than, eating at home. It's a question of balance, and I think you can only go so far with the work-at-home environment.
The moderator is never supposed to inject his opinions into these talks, but I think I broadly agree with both of you. But having said that, if I can just call on the organizers to give us the poll results. Okay, looks like 39% of the audience thinks that remote work is going to empty out urban centers. Commercial property prices, and more affordable cities usher in an urban renaissance. Okay, if we can just switch back, do any of you want to just comment on the poll results?
Well, if prices fall, then the properties won't remain empty. Right? So the normal thing that happens in commercial property markets is when there's a drop in demand, and I think there's no question that remote working is a drop in demand, what happens is that prices fall and newer, grittier businesses come in and take the space that has been emptied out. If you think about how much demand there was for downtowns pre-COVID, I have no doubt that will continue. It just may be slightly different businesses.
Okay. Hazel, please go ahead.
I would agree with sorry, I would go ahead and say we've seen this in Dublin during the recession that happened in 2009, kicked off in 2008-9, and by 2012, across the board, you had empty shops and empty commercial spaces that were there for months and years. Before then, they became pop-ups, and what then materialize were more creative, grittier, as I said, spaces that actually enterprise. That was great for the urban centers, great for the local communities, and it was also great for creativity. It actually brought an injection to new creativity into Dublin. So I would definitely say commercial prices dropping may not be a bad thing altogether.
Hazel, while I have you, let me also, a question from the audience. Unfortunately, all the questions are anonymous, it looks like. This is a question, though, addressed to you. What needs to be done differently to adapt the 15-minute city model to smaller cities? Is it possible to leverage private sector investment in the same way? Yeah.
Yes, in a way, but like Dublin's pretty small. We don't live in a big city at all. I used to live in New York, and whenever I came home to Dublin, it was like, oh, we're actually a lot smaller than I had thought. And the private sector investment, yes, in terms of certain spaces, I would say there is a opportunity there for when it comes to the tech space and when it comes to creating kind of tech hubs, and also in terms of funding and investing in what we call approved housing bodies to help with social housing, to help build with social housing. So there are certain spaces that I think private investment would be good, but I think across the board, it needs to be publicly funded. We need to raise funds because ultimately it comes back to what I said at the beginning, that your public investment means that you will have a better city that's controlled by the city council and its councillors, and also general governance, that they will be more invested in the survival of it. So I think anything you turn to tend to privatize will, in the long run, not benefit the community as well. And we've seen it here with municipal waste being the main example. So it's patterns you've seen in different cities, that once you privatize something, for the immediate short term, it's good, but then for the longer term, it's detrimental for the city.
Ed, do you broadly agree with that?
You know, I'm with Deng Xiaoping on this. I don't think I worry if a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. I don't think that there's a right answer in terms of services being private or public. There are certainly times in which privatization has been an absolute disaster, and there are times in which privatization has led to cost savings and more efficacy. The work of Eduardo Engel is particularly good on public-private partnerships and when they work and when they don't. But the answer is just proceed with care and try and figure out whether or not a private entity is going to be an efficient producer, or it's going to be an entity that's going to run away from quality and bribe the heck out of the city council. Both things have happened in history.
Okay, so I have one more question from Tracy Zhou from Jiangsu, China. And this is a question that any of you can address. So her question is, COVID-19 challenges the resilience of many cities, impacting the economy, healthcare, transportation, and more. How can we build a more resilient city? And how do we prioritize different aspects of resilience? Any of you who would like to take it?
I nominate Nan. He hasn't spoken in a while. Or Norman.
Anyone can take it. It's fine. I mean, Norman, do you have thoughts on this, on the resilience question?
I think it's a feedback from experience. This is not going to be the last health crisis. This is not going to be the last pandemic. There were very learned voices that warned everybody of the current pandemic ahead. So I think it's a learning curve to improve the infrastructure of response, of health, to take advantage of the changes, to make the city healthier, cleaner, quieter, to plant more trees which will absorb carbon dioxide, to recognize the response of the health sector, and to build more resilience, more capability, more capacity into those services.
So Reuben, just
yeah.
if I could just add quickly.
Yeah,
so
please,
the sad
quickly,
truth is, whereas in the 19th century, waterborne illnesses were crucial, and so cities could protect themselves by investing in sewers and piped water. Airborne illnesses really do require a different response. Ventilation helps, but really the critical actor in this is actually not the city, it's the federal government, it's the national governments, which spend so much on healthcare and ended up with this, right? And so we really need to have a much greater focus on communicable diseases. That means that we are protected in a way that makes sure this never happens. And that requires a combination of research, early warning systems, and technology.
Hazel, because you run a city, clearly, and I know you've probably likely thought about the resilience issue. I mean, do you have any quick thoughts to add before we turn to the last question?
Well, I'm slightly biased in where I'm going to steer this tangent to. I also chair the Green Party, who is a coalition party in government in Ireland. And for me, the pandemic is one thing, but the climate crisis is another. So for us as a community and across the world, you're going to have various crises coming up. So the resilience factor is as Norman was saying, in terms of prevention, building up capacity, but also understanding the research element that we need to start fighting this. We need to have certain things in place across the board, apart from just health, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of housing, in terms of environment. How do we protect our citizens across the board in every way? That's how I would look to build resilience right now.
Okay, we're out of audience questions, but I'm going to use moderator's prerogative to ask Ed one last question. Ed, if you can very quickly answer this. Why is there, so when you look at the history of pandemics, why is there a significant economic difference between various pandemics? So for instance, the Black Death actually turned out to be beneficial for the economy, whereas COVID has been a disaster for the economy. If you could just very quickly just touch on that.
Absolutely. In some sense, the whole global economy has hurtled in a way that has made us maximally vulnerable to an airborne pandemic, right? So in an age of subsistence agriculture, if a third of your population dies, what that means is that the remaining population have a lot more land per capita, and that means they get a lot richer. In the case of manufactured goods, yeah, the factories are vulnerable. But in fact, you can still sell the product, right? Especially with the move from wool to cotton in the late 18th and early 19th century. You could heat that cotton and make sure it wasn't carrying any bacteria with it. Now, in a world of urban service economies, where in fact, these particularly less skilled workers have found that selling a latte with a smile is a safe haven in a world of automation, right? That urban opportunity disappears when the smile turns into a source of peril rather than a source of pleasure. And so because we have become a face-to-face economy, we are at our most vulnerable point, which is why it's so crucial that we invest in a way that makes sure that this never happens again.
Perfect. So the good thing about technology is it makes us start on time and end on time. But the good news is we've got a really positive message that's come out of this panel, and I hope the world listens to it. Thank you very much to all my panelists for a great discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, Reuben, thank you so much. All right, Reuben, thank you so much. And we're going to continue talking about technology. The future is digital, that much is clear. And will digital cities exacerbate or narrow inequality? Well, our next panel, moderated by Emily Chang, will explore the transformations underway in urban society, featuring Jean Liu, president of DD, Carlo, Ratti, director of the MIT Sensible Seeable City Laboratory, and Neil Shen, steward of Sequoia Capital, founding and managing partner, Sequoia Capital China. Emily, all yours.
Thank you so much. And thanks to Jean, Neil, and Carlo for joining us. Jean is joining us from Beijing, Neil is in Shenzhen, and Carlo is in Italy. So very excited to hear your perspectives from China. The country seems to have bounced back from the initial impact of COVID faster than anywhere else, but also the pandemic arrived there first, and I'm sure that was terrifying. I'd love to hear from you, Jean, what that was like as a business leader and as a human that first month in the pandemic. Give us some of your personal experience.
Yeah, I have to say it's been a crazy month, and the most memorable moment was the Chinese New Year Eve. I remember very vividly, at that time, Wuhan just announced a lockdown, and there were, no public transportation. So all the core team members of DD got together on Zoom, and we discussed the next steps. And I remember my colleague volunteered himself to go out there and organize the task force, basically a volunteering driver fleet to support the local healthcare givers. It was a very touching moment because I heard the fireworks at the background and the kids chattering at the background. So that was the most memorable moment for me.
Now, Neil, you're not only an investor, you are the co-founder of Ctrip, one of the most prominent travel companies in China. At the beginning of this, did you think this was going to be catastrophic?
Absolutely. Fortunately, I have the experience back, 17 years ago when the SARS hit China. I remember I was, president and CFO of Ctrip, and our, basically booking very much come down to almost like a zero, within very short period of time. And this time around, at the very, beginning of, the new year, I think everyone is very concerned, especially people who are in the travel industry. I'm pretty sure that's very true to the Ctrip management. But the good thing is COVID is well under control within relatively short period of time, and we see travel actually coming back pretty quickly. I think business travel really back to normal probably toward the end of the second quarter, and leisure travel also has been picking up, including people actually traveling to the local destinations. The suburbans, actually you see some very dramatic pickup because people cannot travel overseas.
Interesting. Carlo, your work involves gathering unprecedented amounts of data from cities around the world. And I'd love the 360-degree view. How are cities around the world doing mid-pandemic? Hope for a vaccine, but still no vaccine yet as we head into winter months.
Yeah, so I think, we certainly will get back to normal. Now, we still don't know if that is going to be in a few months, if it's going to take a bit longer, but we're certainly going back to normal. I think, however, there's one lesson I think it's very important that we should probably keep with us following the pandemic. And we've seen in cities all over the world the ability to change much faster, use the crisis in order, projects that had been discussed for 5, 10, 20 years that then were made in just a matter of weeks. And so this approach, which is a trial and error approach, I think is something the cities all over the world experimented with. And I hope that this stays with us in the long term, because it will really make our cities much more responsive, especially in the face, in the wake of all the new technologies, urban technologies that are going to transform them.
Now, are there any cities, Carlo, in particular, that are changing faster than others?
Now, I helped the World Economy Forum Global Future Council on cities. And actually, one of the cities that have been featured mostly in Europe for this has been Milan. One reason is that Milan was one of the first cities to be hit by COVID, and so started developing this kind of very interesting, quick feedback loop, trying something, see how people responded eventually, redo it or fix it. And I've seen that applied more and more. I think, Stockholm is also moving very, very fast, and I've seen similar responses also in cities all over the world. I don't think we can generalize based on country, but it's more like a matter of mayor by mayor, city by city.
Now, I actually lived in Beijing from 2008 to 2010, and I remember remarking month to month how quickly change happened there. Even back then, it was palpable. Now I have friends in China who say it's changing faster than ever before, and the Chinese government is rapidly moving to digitize the entire country, using COVID as a way to sort of push that through. I'm curious, Neil, there's this stereotype from the outside of, smart helmets and thermometer guns on a sort of mass scale. What is really happening there?
Well, I think China is well prepared even before the COVID from a smart city perspective. I'm here in Shenzhen, and there is an app called iShenzhen, and every citizen of Shenzhen can use that to check his tax payment, can check with the public facilities around him and her. And obviously with COVID, now you have one additional function, which is the health code. You can use that and to basically check if there's any venues that you should avoid. And then obviously, if you have a green code, that means that you are relatively, I think, safe. So I think, it's very important that we already actually have done a lot along the line of digitalization of many of the services, both private sector as well as public sector. On the private sector, obviously, ride-sharing, takeout business has been very popular in China. I mean, Didi has been seeing probably highest the number of rides per day, among all countries. I think China can, use those tools to quickly tackle the issues and challenges when COVID happened early this year.
So, Jean, obviously, you're the perfect person to address that. Talk to us about the hit that the ride-sharing business took, all of the measures involved in protecting the drivers, protecting the passengers, and sort of how the business has recovered. Like, where is ride-sharing? Where is Didi in China now?
Sure. When the pandemic came, the business basically came off cliff suddenly. So it was quite dramatic around January, February, and we gradually see recovery starting from April. And right now, we are fully back. We are fully back and all-time high. We are serving 60 million rides every day, which is very nice. So what we have done over the past, more than half a year, basically, number one, we need to make sure our drivers and passengers are safe. So, we urge our drivers to wear masks, encourage our passengers to wear masks. We send out free masks for everyone. And also, we have set up this relief fund for our drivers and passengers, especially for the quarantined, if drivers got quarantined or infected, just in case. And thirdly, we have been working with the insurance company and leasing companies so we can extend the lease payment. So there have been a lot of things we have done in other countries like Latin America, Australia. We have also installed plastic dividers so that we can keep passengers and drivers separated, so to lower the infection chance. So there have been a number of things. One thing I feel extremely proud of was the Didi Hero initiative. Because back then, I don't know, Neil, if you remember, there were no public transportation in a lot of cities. And doctors and nurses, healthcare givers, they just can't get around. After a whole day work, they have to walk home. A lot of them need to walk for an hour or even 2 hours. So what we have done is really organize a team of drivers, and they volunteer themselves. More than 140,000 drivers in Wuhan volunteer themselves to offer free rides for the drivers. And that's what we have done. So we learn to be a resilient organization, and we learn how to ride out the cycles, through the whole pandemic period.
Meantime, while things might be getting back to a sort of normal in China, cases are skyrocketing almost everywhere else. Carlo, you're not just gathering data about cities, you're also an architect, you are an inventor, you're an engineer, and I understand you're working on turning shipping containers into mobile isolation and ICU wards that could be, pitched within a matter of hours. Tell us about that.
Sure, that was one of the first projects we did when the pandemic hit. I think like many of us, we asked ourselves, how can we contribute with our skills to what is happening? And, the interesting thing is that we need, again, it's about innovation. We need to find new ways to address the crisis very, very quickly. And so we wanted to build more ICUs and wanted to scale up quickly. What we did was actually do the project in open source. So share, first of all, develop all the drawings with the group. The group, within a matter of a couple of weeks, grew to over 1,000 people. And then share the drawings so that different people can actually take them and use them for fabrication. And the amazing thing is that by doing this, by parallelizing, by doing what people do with software, with open source software, and we're able to do something normally in a traditional design approach would take at least 6 months to cut it down to 6 weeks. And that was, I think, for us was very, very exciting. Now there's companies fabricating curapods. They're called curapods all over the world, here in Italy, in the Emirates, in the US, in Canada. One of my favorites is actually a team of people in Canada used to turn shipping containers into containers for growing marijuana legally. It's legal in Canada. And actually, they use our drawings in order to change their business. Now they're making intensive care units for the Canadian market. So somehow, again, the virus's code, genetic code that replicates in the taxas. And if you design code, use the code of design, the code of human intelligence in a similar way, by spreading and replicating and parallelizing, we can fight fast in a much better way than how we do normally. Again, an example of how the crisis forces us to rethink the way we operate. Oh, you lose Emily. Should we just continue the conversation here? It looks like there's a problem. We can continue the conversation amongst ourselves.
Hi, and I'm just taking off my sweater a little bit here. Technology, it can be our savior and it can be our nemesis. So we're going to hopefully get Emily back up. In the meantime, Jean, Carlo, Neil, I'm going to continue with the conversation, if I may. Emily getting you guys off to a wonderful start. And I want to jump in because you guys really laid the ground of kind of what we've seen post-pandemic, some of the responses. And I think let's go to technology. I mean, do we think that there are technologies out there that will ultimately kind of save our cities? And let me bring in Neil on this, because I do wonder, what is it that we're going to kind of hold in this moment and that will carry us into the future? And I do wonder what you think about that.
Well, I think many of those applications have been there before, and their adoption has accelerated because of COVID. And I do believe some of those will stay there for the consumers to continue to use for many years to come, because this has served a great period of time for education purpose. For example, online hospital services, which is a initiative that many hospital has taken in the last several years. But during COVID period of time, you see that service has been picked up pretty dramatically, thanks to obviously technology being offered. But also very importantly now that many of those hospitals have secured an online hospital service license, which gives them the opportunity to sell online medical services. And they can leverage those large e-commerce companies to deliver the drugs. And at the same time, we are seeing the local government allow that the medical insurance can cover the drug and medical services. That gives another boost to online hospital service, and which I think will probably be a reflection point for the China medical sector, and I'm pretty sure that many of those new applications will be developed along those platforms.
I'm back, Carol. Thank you so much for jumping in. Jean, I want to talk to you about how some of the innovations that Didi has been making at this time. You've been working on piloting grocery delivery, which, as I understand it, started off with trying to help people get essential goods delivered. And now it's growing incredibly quickly. I caught you on the phone in Chengdu, where you're just experimenting, but already orders are up to like 7 million a day. Talk to us about that project.
Sure. I think that's also some initiative we have been taking after post-pandemic because we noticed people prefer to stay home and order groceries. So we started the initiative around February, and the team worked really, really hard. So we have seen very promising numbers. It means there's huge value in this market. And at the same time, we have also been trying some other innovation. For example, we just launched the first version of EV designed for rideshare, worldwide first designed for rideshare version of EV, and that's very rideshare driven, if you will. So we have, the power sliding doors, so people can get in and out more easily, much more spacious space, less space for this type of car, this grade of cars, and also, inside of car entertaining system, et cetera, et cetera. So these will be very popular, we would imagine, because people would want an alternative to public transportation. So we want to make sure we can offer more comfortable and affordable services. So after trying everything on software, on technology, online technology, we have been going hardware. So that's the new initiative we feel extremely excited about. And also autonomous driving, of course. We think that will be the ultimate solution for safety, for health problems. So that's also something we have been investing very heavily in.
Now, as much as there's been a flight to suburbs in the midst of the pandemic, COVID is actually having a huge impact on the urban poor. And the UN estimates that 68% of the world's population will actually live in urban areas by 2050. Carlo, I'm curious, what should architects, what should governments, what should urban planners be doing to make sure that cities, as they change so rapidly, are also resilient, greener, and more equitable?
Yeah, well, I'll go back to a couple of things to what we were saying before, right? Ultimately, cities, the way we think about the future of cities should really rest in the hands of citizens. So I think it's creating healthy feedback loops of innovation, trying something, get people's feedback, decide what works, what doesn't work, and by doing that, accelerate urban evolution. I think that as a method seems to be the best way to achieve what you're saying. There's not one recipe fit all cities. Every city is different, even different climate, different materials, different morphology of the city means they will have different type of responses, but it's more about the methodology to do this. Now, I want to add something about what was just mentioned about mobility, and certainly, I can see all of those innovations happening and going to change a lot the ride-hailing market. At the same time, there's something I think is very interesting, which is micromobility. And micromobility, for me, is interesting for two reasons. The first reason is that certainly is much more efficient than a car, a 5-seater, to move like 70, 80 kilos for less than 2 miles on average. So micromobility is much more efficient in terms of energy usage or street usage. Micromobility, as you know, is e-bikes, scooters, and many more form factors that I think will emerge in the next few years. Now, the problem is that micromobility has been losing a lot of money, bleeding a lot of money over the past 2 or 3 years. And it would be really bad if it were to miss and lose that mode of transportation. Micromobility is also making public transportation much more appealing because you can take the subway and then do your last mile with a scooter. You jump from one mode into another mode, some kind of multimodality on the spot. Now, we are working on that at MIT. Actually, one of our companies, the first company we spun off for the lab called Super Pedestrian, that operates micromobility which is called Link. And there we're using a lot of artificial intelligence to do self-maintenance and try to turn an industry that at the moment doesn't work into something that could really have a future in our cities. At the moment, we have solutions, but most of them are not financially viable. So if we fix it, I think micromobility could actually be a great, open up a great future, both in everywhere on the planet, including in the global south, for rethinking mobility in cities.
We have quite an eloquent question, a few eloquent questions coming in from Chinese social media. Neil, I'll throw this one out to you. Remote education and work during COVID have exposed a big urban digital divide. How can governments and tech firms narrow that digital divide? I know you're doing a lot of work in online education, so figured you could swing at that.
Well, I think online education really have played a role to providing a level playground for everyone. I think it's very, very important that such services could be provided online because in many cities in China, you really lack of high quality teachers But with online programs today, for example, through our portfolio company, Joyabang and VIP Kid, kids in a very remote city could actually enjoy the very best teacher through such a platform. And I think that's a very important way to narrow the gap between the different quality of education offer in the big city versus the countryside. And online education has clearly been accelerated during the COVID. In the past, people used that mostly as a tutoring tool for kids, but now we're talking about mainstream. We're talking about the junior high school, the senior high school, even the college have adopted those programs and tools to reach out all the kids. Some of those may not able to travel to the classroom in person.
Now, Shynn, there has been. Oh, go ahead, Carlo. Yeah.
Oh, no, I wanted to add something very quick about this. I think certainly education is going to be disrupted. And there's a very interesting model which is emerging now. I was just talking the other day to some Harvard students, and what they did, they actually created something that you could call like a small commune or kibbutz to study together. And I think that's what is missing to just online education. We've seen online education, MOOCs, they were very popular a few years ago, and then we realized a university education is much more than that. But if you combine the MOOCs with also the fact that people can come together and create small communities, small campuses, distributed across the planet, in big cities, in small places, I think that model could really be the model that closes the gap, as you're saying, and tries to develop a new university model. We're still working with a university that was designed in the year 1000 in Bologna, and then in Oxbridge, in Cambridge and Oxford, a couple of centuries later. So I think it's probably time to rethink it.
Now, we actually do have results of our poll question. And a reminder, the question is, which technologies will take off post-COVID? Facial recognition coming in at 21%, autonomous cars, robot and drone deliveries, virtual presence at 48%. That is the winner. Neil, does that sound about right to you?
Well, I'm pretty sure this is probably a very important product, and people are very looking forward to. But I think at this moment, mostly those applications are limited to games or some specific industrial vertical applications. It's going to take some time because we need hardware to improvement. We need 5G and all that. So I think I'm very optimistic, but probably it's going to take a bit while for such services to be more sort of appealing to broader base of users.
I'm hoping the next time we do this, we can all be with each other virtually, because it would be a lot smoother. I want to talk about drones and robotics. And Shynn, any chances of Didi delivering groceries via drones in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. We can always do it. For the, robotics, we launched the autonomous, a robo-taxi in June, and we have seen very good results and a lot of very positive feedback from our users. And we do believe this is the ultimate solution, when we face problems, like now in pandemic. It's the ultimate solution to kill accidents, right? However, it will take some time to get it commercially effective, right? It can, in small lab tests, it all works really well. However, we believe it would need to take some time to really get it to people and work effectively. But that's something we have been working on.
Now, before I go,
I just want to add one thing, where we talked about pandemic and, as a private business, what we have learned is really to do the right thing, to do the right and hard thing and keep doing it. So, for example, investing in autonomous driving or investing in safety or investing in offline supporting systems. These are all very long-term investment work and take a lot of effort and commitment. So that's what we have learned from, the whole pandemic.
Now, before we go, I want to touch on.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I want to touch on the political environment because, technology is great, but we also need the partnership of government. And former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger told our New Economy Forum audience yesterday that he's worried that the tensions between the U.S. and China could escalate to a military conflict at some point if something doesn't change. I'm curious how the market environment, the geopolitical environment, in the midst of a pandemic, Neil, is impacting the strategy and the choices that you are making?
Not much, I have to say. I think, in the last 10 years, the two areas we have been focused a lot in China, one is digital technology, which means obviously every single sector is going through digitalizations, whether it's consumer technology or whether it's enterprise software. And I see this actually has been picking up very rapidly the last 12 months. The other area which we have spent a lot of time on is healthcare. And obviously during the COVID period, we see people paying more attention to this area. And so our investment in the medtech and in the biotech area has been paid off pretty handsomely. And we're very lucky and proud that some of our portfolio company participated in launching the RNA testing kit. And one of our portfolio company actually was a UK-based vaccine company who worked with Oxford and AstraZeneca in try to come up with the most advanced vaccine vaccine product to address the COVID. So I think the theme hasn't really changed, and I only see these continue to become very important trends in China in the next several years.
So that is the new reality I guess we're going to live in. Carlo, we have just a few seconds left. Are we going to recognize our post-pandemic world 10 years from now? Will it have changed so much that we won't be able to believe it?
Well, I think probably this pandemic has been accelerating a lot of existing trends. Somehow it also happened at the right time. Think about the same pandemic 20 years ago without the ability of working remotely, of doing smart work, and so on. We've been totally different. We've been much more stuck. And so all this acceleration, I think, yes, we're going to see it in 10 years. At the same time, I think, this is not going to be a big change for cities. Cities have seen many pandemics over the past 10,000 years, since the beginning of cities around that time, 10,000 years ago. Many pandemics, even more devastating pandemics, like the pandemic in the 14th century in Venice killed over 60% of the population, and still the city went back. And I think this time as well, we'll see big cities come back quite soon, I believe. They are kind of a powerful magnet to bring us together in physical space. That's what we need. That's what we need and what we miss, especially now. I mean, you said it just before. Next time we need to meet in person, like we did last time.
Absolutely. Let's hope. Jean, we got a little bit more time, and I'm curious, what do you think, based on all the work that you're doing at Didi, what does 10 years, the world, China, the business look like to you?
Sure. I think because of the shared vehicle, electric vehicle, and autonomous driving, at least we will see much fewer parking lots inside of the city, and people will use more bikes, e-bikes, like what Carlo said, and also, people will prefer to order groceries at home. So it will be a greener city. It will be more cleaner air, and there will be a lot of parks in the cities.
Neil, would you agree with that based on what you're seeing from entrepreneurs right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, all those technology applications really depend on a more advanced, mobile connectivity. So 5G, I think, is very important. And obviously, all those applications could be run on 5G in a more effective way. And if you look at 10 years, probably we're going to looking at 6G. We don't know what technology is going to be, come out of that, but at least we all can imagine that everything will be digitalized in a way that, there's no, limitation on bandwidth. And obviously, I also feel like, robotics, as you mentioned, will come to every single corner of our life, not only in industrial applications, but also probably, as home appliance, as, important tools for hospitals, for hotels and restaurants, and so on.
Now, we're getting more questions from the audience, and there seems to be a theme about resilience, about the poor. The latest question coming in from Tracy Zhou from Jiangsu in China about how we build more resilient cities. Jean, there's been an urgency here in the United States when it comes to gig workers to give them better protections. How are you thinking about that in terms of, potentially rewriting the social contract with drivers, with the folks who are delivering your groceries, who are, I'm sure, grateful to have a job, but would also like the protections that would come along with it in a contract position?
Sure. Didi is now, I would say, one of the largest gig platforms, and we are also the largest flexible work platform. We actually support work opportunities for more than 14 million drivers, right? And a lot of them, this is their second job, and 4 million of them, are laid off workers. 10% are women. A lot of them are single mom or, work from home mom. So, I think the point for Didi is how can we provide more income, more meaningful income for them? Because everyone, needs a second chance. A lot of them have been laid off and, don't want to go out for interviews. So that's the minimum we can do. And that's what we have been thinking about. And in terms of protection, for example, during the pandemic, we have set up the relief fund, and we have been working with insurance companies together to provide better insurance package for our drivers. And we have been working on the ecosystem so we can build a more healthy ecosystem for our users, for our drivers on this platform.
Now, Carlo, given that, Neil founded an online travel business, Jean is in the business of ride sharing. Do you think that transportation and the way we move around the world will ever go back to normal post-pandemic? Like, are we going to go back to riding buses and subways to work? How many of us are actually going to go back to work at all?
Yeah, no, I think we need to go back to work. Actually, we've been doing some big data analytics on the MIT campus. So what you see is that, if you remove physical space, we closed the campus at MIT in the middle of March 2020, still closed. It will be closed until the spring, most likely. So what you see is that when you remove physical space, then our social networks become much more fragile. We lose a lot of the weak ties. The weak ties connect us to new ideas, to new people, to new groups, new different social circles. And I think physical space is very important for that. So because of that, I really believe we'll go back to physical space. And think also about all what we've been doing, all the money we've invested over the past few years for team building. That was about bringing people together in the same place and doing activities together. That is certainly going to be even more important in the future. At the same time, I think that we will also keep the flexibility we came to enjoy over the past few months. And so if we keep that flexibility, still it means, we need to rethink a lot of our offices, doing much more hot desking. If we go to the office, so as I said, I believe we will go back to the office, but maybe we'll go just 3 days per week, even 2 days per week. At the moment in Paris, the rule is 2 days of smart working, 2 plus 3. So 2 days of smart working, 3 days in the office. Some people suggest it's going to be in the future more like 3 plus 2. But whatever the balance is, then that means we need to rethink the office because of this new pattern. To think about the choreography that will allow us to achieve more when we are together in the office, even if we spend less time there. Now, just to finish, another thing I think we will not get back is certainly about international travel. I think we're all conversant now with all these kind of tools, even just what we're using now or similar. And so I think the crazy things we've done of this kind of round-the-world trips for a 2-hour meeting, hopefully that will not come back. That was a big toll on the planet and on us.
Hopefully the virtual presence capabilities will help with that. Neil, two of the most prominent VCs here in the United States, Bill Gurley and Reid Hoffman, told me that they are now investing in entrepreneurs that they've never met, companies that don't have offices or office space. Reid Hoffman said that, sometimes he's wondering, is this really real? Are you seeing that in China, or is the state of play more normal at this point?
Well, I do think, a lot of those companies now use virtual meetings and different type of online working tools to, get connected, even though, they, probably have, different, physical offices. But at the same time, I think people will still want to get together. I mean, I feel like, you have to get together, to build company cultures and get to know each other. So, I mean, it's very important to use those online tools, but at the same time, there's something which is not replaceable by physical, meetings. So we do obviously meet some entrepreneur online and make the investment decision, especially for early stage. But at the end of the day, we still love to meet them in person.
Jean, as you think about your business, having gone through such a titanic hit, do you see it actually going back to normal, or will things about Didi, the way you do business, the way that you operate, be forever changed as a result of the pandemic and what you've learned?
Sure. First of all, we felt very lucky that, the business came back very nicely, and, it's all-time high again. However, the business definitely changed. The organization transformed. We have learned a lot. First of all, we've learned how to get courage, doing the right thing, to make the right call. There are a lot of very tough decisions to be made during the pandemic, right? Whether we form the task force, how do we take the risk? And secondly, how can we be true to ourselves? Because before, for young companies like this, we tend to, picture a very beautiful future. However, after pandemic, right, we have learned, everyone should be true to themselves, and, we need to learn, it could not be perfect. We are not perfect, so we just have to try our best. So, I think that's the second thing we have learned, and we have been doing it. We have been, holding all hands meeting online and, tell everyone what was going on during the pandemic. So everyone got, aligned. And third thing we have learned is empathy, again, understanding people's needs, understand, people from different countries, because we have global business, how users, what users want during this crisis. So there are a lot of we have learned, and I do believe that also how our country wins this battle, right? Courage, to be true to ourselves, to be transparent, and also to be empathetic and taking care of people.
And with that uplifting and eloquent thought, I think we will end it there. Jean Liu, Neil Shen, Carlo, Ratti, thank you all for joining us. I'm excited to see which of your predictions hold true for our world and our cities. Thank you all for taking the time to join us.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, Emily, thank you so much. And real troopers, as I said, technology can be really good, and it can also drive us a little crazy. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about startup cities, the post-pandemic reboot. We're going to talk about how can cities restart the engine of economic growth. Our speakers are Mohamed Alabbar, founder of Amar Properties. We also have Zhang, co-founder and chief executive officer of Soho China. And the moderator will be Jonathan Woetzel, Global Institute Director and Senior Partner, Shanghai McKinsey & Company. Jonathan, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. And look forward to this conversation about cities in the post-COVID context, rebooting for a new growth era. And with me are two developers who have built cities, who have been part of the tremendous growth story of emerging markets. Only appropriate for the New Economy Forum to have this chance to talk to Shyn and Mr. Alabbar about their progress and what they see. So I'm going to start perhaps actually with you, Shyn. We've seen Soho over the years become almost the standard for aspiring Chinese people to live in the city, and then all of a sudden we had this. We had COVID, and now, as we were just hearing from Jean, we're out of it. I mean, China is back. So maybe we could just start with a bit of your take on what happened, and are we in fact back in China? What happened to the city? What happened to the buildings? What happened to the people in the buildings over the last, let's say, over this year, over the 2020? Mm-hmm.
Sure. When the virus first broke out in China, it was, scary. The whole cities and the whole country was shut down. But remember, we had SARS a while ago, so I think China was better prepared for the crisis, as people kind of knew what it was like to be locked down, and knew what it was like to wear masks, knew what it was like to stay inside. So we saw the cities were completely quiet. There was like hardly anybody was on the streets, and the first quarter was that way. And then second quarter, I think around May, we started seeing people going back to work, and it was still very limited. When in the beginning of going back to work, we were also worried about how do we make sure that people coming to the buildings are safe. So we put infrared cameras in every entrance of the buildings, and making sure that anyone who comes in were body temperature checked. And so, it was, and then, China had this health QR code. So then we were checking everybody's QR code. So let me just explain the QR code. Everyone has been given a QR code. So you have it on your cell phone. And if you have a green, that means you're healthy, you can go anywhere. If you are orange, that means you had a history. And then if you're red, you really should be quarantining or in a hospital. So that was very helpful in terms of tracing and identifying who potentially has had the health problem. And I think with that, with the tracing, with all that technology, we'll very quickly see that the buildings were back to, quickly went back to the 70%. Pre-COVID buildings were all 95% occupied. Then we went down to 0, then we went up to 50%. And probably by middle of this year, we saw like 70% went up. But restaurants were still really careful. Then, people were still careful not to go to restaurant to eat. So retail continued to suffer. And then really what we saw a complete comeback was October. And the first week of October, China had the national holiday when, hotels are fully booked, restaurants are fully booked, and everywhere there's like people. So by now we're actually seeing all the buildings back to pre-COVID level of mid-90s occupancy. And even though China has no COVID really, we're still seeing, you see it on the street that half of the people still wearing masks. And I think, but in terms of back to work is really, everything is back to normal now.
Well, I mean, that's an encouraging picture. And I want to come back to you in terms of what might be different in terms of how work is done and other aspects. But perhaps I could first turn to you, Mr. Alabbar, and sort of, is that the picture that we see as well in Dubai and the Emirates and the region? Or, I mean, you cover so many areas in terms of growth. How have you seen this develop? And then also, what is your outlook in the sense of when will it come back?
Well, I think we all can agree on one thing, that this is really an attack on humanity. I mean, call it whatever you want to call it, but this is just so strange. It's so large, devastating. Of course, let me tell you one thing first, is that when this happened, we really didn't know what to do. We were scared, and I probably respect a lot of CEOs who knew what to do. We didn't know what to do. If you're, as an organization, if your balance sheet is not right, if you don't have the right talent, if you don't have the right company, if you are not planning way ahead, you are really in big trouble. When it comes to, we operate across 14 countries and across different, I have the real estate business, I have my large e-commerce platform in the Middle East, and I do have my very large food business. But in summary, I would say the following. The great learning for me is that during this unfortunate event, government have really shown their quality. And one of the things that really I'm starting to understand is that leadership in this is so critical. You've got, unfortunately, leadership in China, I think part of Europe, and you've got America, where thank God they only have two political parties, not more. They are fighting each other while Americans are getting sick, more people are dying, and the fight is going on. That is one agony. The second agony, worldwide, you've got the poor getting poorer, the poor is losing their jobs, while stock market is rocketing. Okay, I'm a businessman, I have 200,000 people working for me, but this is something that hits me in the face as a result of the virus. The effect on the lower income, mid-income, lower income people is catastrophic. And that really worries me as a businessman. It's not all, it's not all about, okay, will I survive during this crisis? What's happened to the society around me? Because I survive with society, and we have social responsibilities. So I'm asking all of us, is that what does this all mean for the people who can't get health care? Again, does it mean that privatization have failed? Because we all keep talking about privatization, but does privatization mean we can privatize healthcare where people don't have enough coverage like America, while a country like UAE and Egypt, the military have came in, took over, built hospitals on site, while there is a lot of government hospital, and that's what happened in China. So I guess who is right, who is wrong? I'm not saying we are right, you are wrong, but we need to think again. But this is the fact of life. Change is the way we live, if it's technology or it's the environment or if it's political instability or terrorism. And this is the largest, I guess, event, or I call it attack on humanity that we've all seen. And I hope, I hope within 9 months, 12 months, we're in better position.
Unquestionably, it is the actually largest economic shock since World War II. So I think that's absolutely factually correct. And so I hear you saying that it's the response that made the difference. And so I'm curious if I could keep going on this then, as to what's the next thing then? What is the next element of that response? Or what, again, back to you, Mr. Alabbar, sort of as you see governments and the private sector in the region, what do you see as the priority for this next 6 to 12 months? Is it the economics? Is it the health? Is it other technology and innovation? Is it all of that? I'm just, what do you see happening next?
I think it's very simple. It's purely health, because it's the base of everything. Health is fine, then tourism is there, business activities are there. So what, for example, what the UAE have done is that even though they opened up the country, but they tripled down on testing. They have not stopped. In fact, instead of 50,000 a day for the size of our country, now we're about 150,000 testing a day. Still watching the environment, still everything is on standby. So I would say that doubling down on health and doubling down on containing the virus, what makes our shopping malls are doing well, relatively restaurants are doing well. I think some businesses are relatively doing well. Of course, some businesses are not doing well. The tourism industry and travel is suffering a lot.
Well, then health comes first. Now, back to you, Shyn. I'd be interested, first of all, I said I was going to come back to say what actually is different in China, if anything, not just in the way to work, but in, for example, retail. You have Soho is well known for having a lot of very high-end or mixed-use developments. How have habits changed? And then, yes, what is the what's happening next. And I want to remind the audience, there's actually a poll question, which is essentially that question. So please do take a look and vote, and we'll come back to that. We'll hear what the audience thinks in a bit. But back to you, Shen, just some thoughts on the future.
But I think we're going to look back in this horrible crisis that the biggest winner in this pandemic is technology. So we are seeing that technology, if things are already happening with a technological disruption, and it just, the COVID has made it even faster. For instance, retail. We already were seeing that retail are suffering, physical retail, because more and more people have moved online for shopping. And this pandemic has really speeded up the whole process, has made retail that much, decline that much faster. And even my, 83-year-old mother, who's now very used to doing shopping online. So that, I think, is just, we will see that after the COVID, as we're already seeing in China, that I think office, people will go back to work in the office. People will go back to live in the city. But, people will shop very differently. So the retail scene is very different. We have to rethink about what do we do with all the retail space there. So many shopping malls are built, so many shopping streets are built, and, with more and more people move to online shopping, then what would happen to our retail space? That's a question for cities and developers who build a lot of retail.
With all of that technology acceleration, what happens to the people? I'm just curious, do you see any change in densities in how people are moving around within your developments, and also to your own companies in terms of the real estate sector itself? Is this technology acceleration, is it going to change people?
I mean, I think people's technology is changing, every corner of our life. But generally speaking, I haven't really seen the fundamental change in people's living. Like, people still live more or less the same way and work more or less the same way. I see that, still move around the same way in the cities or between cities. But really the one area I see that, obviously this is still the early stage of technology that will continue to develop. The other day we were talking about, will people start seeing buildings, buying properties online? I haven't seen that yet. I mean, I know there's a lot of technology coming up to assist the online touring of properties, but it hasn't quite happened that the property transaction and the buying of properties and moved online. Not yet.
So it's more of an acceleration, but less of a fundamental change. And with that, I wanted to welcome Mayor Bottoms. Thank you, Mayor, for joining us. And it's a pleasure. So we are in the midst of discussing kind of where we are in the life of the city as we've had it in this incredible 2020, and what's coming next. And in terms of priorities, maybe I could just go directly to where you are. And you launched an economic mobility plan in the middle of a pandemic. And so I would love to know more about why you did that. Why was that the priority? And how do you think that plays out over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, thank you for the question, and it's great to join you all. I mean, it's been extremely important to have priorities during this time. Like so many people, what we're faced with is navigating the unknown right now. And what we found over the last several months, again, like so many entities across the world have experienced, is that there's been this huge distraction. For us, it was COVID-19 and then the social unrest that we saw across our cities. It made it more important than ever for us to focus in on what our priorities were, what were our goals. So we had been working on an economic mobility plan. We had been working on an affordable housing plan, but with the social protest and also with COVID-19, became important for the community to see that we were doing this work, not just behind the walls of City Hall, but for us to show and give tangible evidence that in the midst of all of the disruptions that we were experiencing with our day-to-day lives, that we were still focused on our goals. And in Atlanta, that is equity. And it also helped us to not only deal with what we are confronting in the present, but really to give us a roadmap as to how we will continue to address these issues going forward. Because what we know, even with the vaccine, with COVID-19, for example, there's still going to be, beyond the physical recovery for us, there's still going to be a huge economic recovery that's likely to linger for many years. And that's why it was important for us to be able in a tangible way to show that to our communities.
Then, because the economic mobility plan, as I understand it, was started actually, of course, before the pandemic. So how have your goals changed, if at all, in the course of what has unfolded over the last 3 or 4 months? Are they the same? Or are they maybe even higher?
Well, the goals are still the same, but I would think the biggest change has probably been the expectation of the number of people throughout our communities that will have to take advantage of this economic mobility plan. Because when we embarked upon this plan, obviously we weren't in the midst of COVID-19. And so we were looking at a smaller sector of our city. But with COVID-19, we have to expect that this economic mobility plan is going to be relevant to many more people who didn't expect to see themselves in this position. And it's the reason why, even aside from this economic mobility plan, we've tried to put structures in place through Invest Atlanta, our economic development arm, to make it easier for people to access grants, to access small loan funds, so that they aren't dependent just upon the federal government and all of the red tape and bureaucracy that entails, and that there is someone in a place in a space locally that they can contact and be able to navigate resources to help their businesses and in many ways their households to be able to survive COVID-19.
Yeah, well, I think that, first of all, it's incredibly encouraging to hear that focus on growth and employment. And in the context of startup cities, maybe I'm going to ask a question to everybody. And again, back to you to start, perhaps, Mayor Bottoms, is where do you see those green shoots of opportunity? I mean, where will the startup cities start up? Are there particular sectors or neighborhoods, or what's the development concept that, given where we are right now, brings us back?
So it's interesting, even in the city of Atlanta, when you think of essential employment, there is that basic employment that even in the midst of where we are with COVID-19, we're still advertising for jobs in the city of Atlanta. Many of them are blue collar jobs, but on the other end of the spectrum, technology is a huge sector in our city. And what we're seeing, obviously, with so many people teleworking and so many kids having to go to school virtually, I believe we'll continue to see success and growth in that area. Because I know everyone in my household right now is connected to a device, either out of necessity or out of pleasure throughout the day. And with the Atlanta University Center, Georgia Tech, and so many other big institutions in Atlanta, we've had a great opportunity to be able to retain and attract people in the areas of technology, and we expect we'll continue to see that grow.
That's great, Mr. Alabbar. Is that the same picture you see in the region? Is it the technology-focused sectors that are going to be the growth opportunities here?
Well, because in the Middle East, remember, out of the 400 million people, 50% are below the age of 28. So, of course, technology is there, but I would say that, all sectors of the economy are really being touched by the young people. But the base of everything is, good education that we need. And then again, if we have good education, we have good talent, are we able to keep them in our cities? Is the environment good enough for them to have a great challenge, great job opportunities? You've got safety, you've got healthcare, quality of life, which is really critical for people in the Middle East. And that's why you have a city like Dubai that the Middle East just flies to. And again, great universities, it's safe, amazing healthcare, beautiful infrastructure. In fact, the whole country, the UAE, and that's happening in Abu Dhabi as well. So much is happening on the field of healthcare and education and soft infrastructure, hard infrastructure. So I think the combination of all, you need all that for it to work. And I know great cities that really have failed the test of COVID, for example. And you find a lot of people leaving these cities. I hope they go and fix that. So you need all of the above for these cities to prosper and create these industries and young industries to grow.
But I hear you saying that a lot of it, in the case of the UAE, will be dependent on flow, in the sense that rebuilding that regional flow for all sorts of services, healthcare, education, tourism, so making it safe. Is that fair to say that's where you see the opportunity for renewing the growth?
Well, I would say that that's a critical requirement while we are going through what we are going through. But then that's only the beginning. Is the place safe? Is the infrastructure good? Is the government really promoting small, medium-sized enterprises? Are the regulation really kind and soft to help people? Are there great universities available? And in UAE, really, and you've got amazing institutions on the government side in education and healthcare. And as I said, really the pandemic have proven that UAE's leadership is very serious about managing its affair. But the healthcare is only one side of it.
Well, Shyn, if I could turn to you, I mean, where do you see the big investments now as in Chinese cities? Has the growth model changed, or where are the, don't want to say hotspots because that sort of has multiple meanings, but where are the growth opportunities that you see, particularly as it reflects in the real estate sector? Mm-hmm.
So I think what we have seen in the past 20 years in China is where the highest growth happened is where there was the highest density of population, which is quite different. It's the opposite of what we're seeing with the pandemic. With the pandemic, people are leaving the cities and going outside of the cities and to avoid high density. But after COVID, when virus is gone, what drives the growth is still where there's a high density of population, there's a high density of human knowledge, and that's where technology drives, that's where all the knowledge drives, and that's where the growth happens. And I don't see that changes. And, I still see that, after this horrible virus goes away, that people still want to be living in a very dense city where there's a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of ideas, new ideas, a lot of innovations. I see, China, if you look at where are the highest growth cities in China, those are almost always the highest density populated cities.
And when we say density means different things to different people. Some people imagine, Manhattan and Wall Street. Other people think of a 3-story building in Paris. What kind of density are we talking about here?
I mean, China obviously has a different scale, right? We're talking about 20 million people population as a high density cities. You look at Beijing, Shanghai. These are all more than 20 million people then population cities, and they continue to drive the growth.
All right, so it is about scale in that sense, that they're bigger. Bigger does lead to better. I think our poll is back, incidentally, it's complete. We have the audience's view. I don't know whether we can show that now. Let's take a quick look. So, right, in terms of, so the question was, what should we invest in first? In other words, the next wave of growth. And I think, a bit of a consensus around infrastructure and job creation. So the infrastructure side is a bit interesting. Maybe we come back to that. Health right up there. So quite a split group, I have to say. Maybe I can come back to you, Mayor Bottoms. I mean, I think that we just heard this discussion about a little bit about scale and also about the importance of connectivity in the face of COVID. How does that play out for Atlanta? I mean, Atlanta is well known for being a fairly large region. So a lot of growth and many different transit authorities and so forth. How do you think about connecting Atlanta in the context of coming back from COVID?
Well, obviously, something that's been at the top of our minds lately has been the digital connectivity. And what we've seen for as progressive of a city as Atlanta is, and it's a world-class city, COVID really has exposed a lot of those gaps, meaning we've seen many of our kids and many of our communities that don't have digital connectivity. They don't have Wi-Fi in the home. So thankfully, we've been able to partner with a number of our technology companies to make sure that people have that basic connectivity that so many of us take for granted. And then, transportation and infrastructure, always big conversations in Atlanta with Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, with our mass transit system. But it really has caused us to take a step back in both those areas as well. When you look at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, one of our largest job centers in the state, we know that our airline industry is not where we are accustomed to it being. So we've had to make a lot of economic adjustments in that area and giving relief to many of our small business owners and minority business owners there. And then even with our transportation planning and our infrastructure planning, where are the needs right now? So the silver lining, many of our infrastructure projects that were underway, we've been able to make a lot of progress in those areas because people aren't out and traffic is not as bad as it normally is. So it's allowed us to get ahead of the curve in many ways. But on the other side of that, we're having to rethink our bonding capacity and how do we go out to the bond market and make sure that we can pay our bills to be able to fund these infrastructure projects. So it's given us a lot of things to have to consider. The pros, we've tried to take advantage of them, but certainly being cognizant of the cons, and many of that's economic related.
Well, Mayor Bottoms, you're on the panel with two world-class developers. So I guess I'm going to ask the question that in the line with this infrastructure initiative, what are some of your thoughts about how that translates into development? And by that also recognizing development for the whole city. And so not just the premium end, but to meet, for example, your affordable housing goals, to spur that technology sector growth. Does the COVID silver lining apply? Will that accelerated infrastructure delivery translate into additional transit-oriented developments, for example?
So that's a great question, because what we don't know is what's going to happen to our real estate market. We have many of our largest job centers throughout Metro Atlanta that aren't open right now. I was eavesdropping on the conversation with my husband the other day with his team. He works with a large company that's headquartered here. It's going to be a couple of months before they go back into their building. So that's going to be the interesting part. But meanwhile, the housing piece remains. So affordable housing has been a challenge in Atlanta. We're not as burdened as many other major cities are. So we still have an opportunity to address our challenges. Our goal was $1 billion in investment, $500 million public funding, $500 million private funding, creating or preserving 26,000 affordable housing units by the year 2026. We're already about 5,000 in. So that goal remains, and it won't go away, because no matter what our transit-oriented development calls for, there's still going to be a need for affordable and workforce housing in Atlanta. But I think certainly the opportunity to take advantage of that around many of our transit centers, we can accomplish both.
That again is an inspiring note. Now, Mr. Alabbar, do you see the same COVID silver lining? I know you are also, as you mentioned, the chair of an e-commerce group, and I just saw that you've introduced autonomous vehicles into in the autonomy. I can't pronounce it, but do you see the same opportunity?
Well, let me go back to social housing, because this is something that's close to my heart, and because I come from social housing, and I think Leeds is trying to do its bit, but that's a subject that I really spend a lot of time on, And in Egypt, we have really an amazing example where the market allows us that for every home we sell, we build one social house. And I guess, we're not going to solve the whole problem, but I really think that we can help 2,000 families a year. That's an amazing opportunity. I think in Atlanta, I'm sure they have better rules when it comes to whatever X percentage of development have to go for social housing of any building permits. That's also something that's really quite important. But if you allow me also to just come back to one very important point, I hope it will also answer your question. That I truly believe, as a person who live on both sides of, I live the digital life and I live the physical life. I mean, nothing better than concrete and aluminium and e-commerce. I truly believe that life will go back to normal. I believe that I don't think we're going to have a lot of big damage to shopping malls. In America, there is a damage because there is overbuilt situation. It's completely different than the rest of the world. I think human beings want to live life. I believe in big cities. So, for me in the Middle East, Cairo, 22 million people is my big city, and it's doing very well. I think a city like one of the cities I do business with is Karachi. Karachi is also close to 18 million people. I do business in Bombay, which is 20 million people. So, but Dubai is dense when you talk about 2 million people. So I truly believe that we'll pass and we'll conquer this virus. And I believe that life will come back. I know digitization have been speeded up, which is good, but I really think that human nature is human nature. And I really think this will make us fitter, will make us better society, better government, better people for the years to come.
I'm encouraged, and I'm personally a believer in the idea of augmentation, that it's not an either or, it's an and so we become more human, not less, as we acquire capabilities. But Shyn, you have the last word. Is there a COVID silver lining for you?
Well, I really think that COVID has showed us what technology can do in a very positive way. That before COVID, we did not know that we can actually work so effectively on Zoom. We did not know that we can actually have a global conference on digital. And this is all something that technology has showed us what it can do. But I think in the end of the day, after COVID, we humans still crave to be with other humans. New ideas and new concepts can only come not when we're alone, when we're together. So I think that the after COVID world would still be, we are, we're in person, we're meeting a lot. We're still going to go back to having in-person conferences. So we're still going to go back to office. We're still going to go back to live in the city. And that I don't think has changed.
Well, as a good friend of mine says, the technology makes us more human, because the technology helps us to achieve that more human interface in spite of all of these challenges. So I want to thank all of you. I think it's a great panel. I hope that everybody keeps in touch, because I actually feel there's a lot of benefit from this conversation. So thank you all, and thank you to Bloomberg.
Please, thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, Jonathan, thank you so much. Technology and people are really learning still how to live together. All right, next up we have a Global Voices video on cities featuring, among other figures, Bogota's bicycle mayor.
As casas são pequenas, as famílias numerosas e não temos como seguir as recomendações da Organização Mundial de Saúde. É como se vivêssemos dois Brasis. Um Brasil que pode ter acesso ao home office, máscara e álcool gel, e outro Brasil que passa fome, que vive em cima do córrego e que falta água.
Traffic is a problem for the flow of travel. Public transport systems seem to be overwhelmed by high demand. The environment is heavily impacted by pollution, and there are health problems related to sedentary lifestyle and respiratory diseases that today are the major cause of death in Bogota. In In this scenario, promoting the use of the bicycle becomes a powerful tool to facilitate the flow of mobility, improve public transport congestion, reduce the emission of polluting particles, and thus, together with the physical activity that cycling involves, improve the citizens' health.
The pandemic has also given us a deeper insight on how more vulnerable these communities are during these difficult times. Their only means of survival is taken away because of the restrictions on movements. In fact, many of them have said to us that they are more afraid of starvation and being evicted than of the virus itself.
O que é esses termos que são usados como home office, lockdown? A população não está entendendo e está achando que a doença é só para rico e, na verdade, está morrendo os pobres e os negros da favela.
The most vulnerable populations have been exposed to contagion during their long trips to work, since for them working at home is not an option due to the nature of their activities and in cases due to the lack of internet connection in their homes.
It is really time for us to be inclusive rather than exclusive in all our efforts and initiatives. Because, as we know, COVID-19 doesn't distinguish anyone according to classes.
To people who want to abandon their cities, I say that this new reality has brought us the unique opportunity to appropriate the public space that has always belonged to us, either by using its infrastructure to mobilize in a more sustainable and healthy way, or to enjoy areas that were previously restricted for citizen enjoyment. So my advice is, instead of leaving the cities, let's all take ownership of them in a responsible and productive way and see how our quality of life will improve.
Our next panel looks at how the changing global order will impact financial markets and the investment world. Our speakers are Ana Botín, Executive Chairman, Banco Santander; Ray Dalio, Co-Chairman and Co-Chief Investment Officer at Bridgewater Associates; and Ann Richards, Chief Executive Officer, Fidelity International. Our moderator for this panel, it is Eric Schatzker, my colleague and editor-at-large at Bloomberg Television. Eric, over to you.
Carol, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome my panelists, Ana Botín, Ray Dalio, and Richards. Good to see all three of you. Double checking that you can hear me. Let's jump right into it. Navigating the new order. As we all know, news of major progress on vaccine development has lifted our hopes, and it's certainly lifted financial markets, but we all know that the experience of the coronavirus will be hard to shake. Panelists, what do you see as the most lasting effects of the pandemic for years to come? Ana, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So I think we've all learned a lot on a personal basis, also in our professional lives. And I think this is going to really, result in permanent consumer and companies' behavior. How exactly that's going to happen is not easy to predict right now. I'd say, first of all, there is a much faster digital, adoption. Just to give you an example, in the month of October, and this was the case in Argentina and in the UK, 80% of all our sales of financial products were online. The average for the group was 50%. So I think this is clearly one of the more important acceleration trends. And this is going to result in big changes across many industries, of course. Very importantly, across smaller companies. So companies that have traditionally been very physical, like restaurants and small retailers, have really accelerated the change online. Beyond that, I think it makes us all very conscious of the global trends. So at a much higher level, climate change, like the virus, affects all of us. And if we don't all change together, it's not going to work. So I think this is the other realization. On the one hand, very much an inward looking, what happens in our community, at the other, what is happening to me in my health, in, again, trends like climate change are important to the rest of the world. And so I think these are some of the things that we'll be seeing. And of course, this is going to have a big impact on our economies and how we live and how society is governed. I think we need to make a big reflection, and I hope that we will do this together, private and public sector, about how this new world needs to be governed, from taxes to regulation to competition rules, because we are going to be deep into the digital economy, and we need to change the way we operate.
Ray, your thoughts, the most lasting effects of the pandemic? I can't hear Ray. It appears we may have lost Ray's mic. Ray, if you can hear me, Ray, perhaps turn your mic back on the screen. We might, may have. I'll tell you what, while you work on that, Ray, let me turn this question to Ann Richards. Anna just gave us her sense of how things are going to change over the long run because of the pandemic. What do you think?
So I totally agree with what Anna said. I think there's three things that have meaningfully changed in the last 9 months. And the first is around the general macro environment. I mean, the situation that we have been in with the incredibly rapid monetary policy shift that we saw in March, April, the speed of the central banks, the extent to which, frankly, indebtedness has just, as a way of navigating through the trough, if you like, indebtedness has risen up. That debt burden is going to be with us for a very long time to come. And how we deal with that debt burden and the effects of that debt burden are going to absolutely drive, and the choices that we make around that debt burden are going to drive, I think, the next decade in terms of what the path of the economy is going to be. So I think that's the first thing, which is a really lasting change. I think the second is around the conversation around sustainable capitalism. And Anna touched on this. She talked about the climate. She talked about a new kind of governance model, if you like. I think it's really interesting that business is probably ahead of government and policymakers now on the issue of sustainable capitalism, perhaps because they've had a near-death experience. And perhaps because we've all looked into the abyss and suddenly realized that shocks, which might seem tail events, actually really can happen, like a pandemic. And maybe it's brought the reality of climate change a little closer to home on that. So I think that this business-led approach to sustainable capitalism is a real driver, and that's not going anywhere soon. And then the third thing, and I suspect that a lot of people watching this will understand what I'm saying, is that we've learned that the radical, that the unexpected, that the really innovative can be done far, far faster than any of us ever thought was possible. When we looked at rolling out Zoom, for example, across the business, we did it in more than 25 countries in less than 2 weeks. Now, as a normal project, that would have taken us probably 8 months in the normal way that you would do it. And yet, because we were put in a position that we had to do it, we did it with remarkable rapidity and actually with almost no problems or consequences in the way that we did it. So I think it's shown us that when we really need to, we can be much more radical and we can move much more quickly. So I think those are three of the things that have meaningfully changed as a result of everything that we've seen in 2020, and the effects will be long lasting.
Ray, we've heard from both Anne and Anna about this idea that the shock of the pandemic has awoken the world to the need for a more sustainable version of capitalism. This is something that you touched on well before the pandemic. I want to hear your thoughts on that point, and also more broadly, what kinds of long-lasting effects you think the pandemic will have.
I think that there were vulnerabilities that existed under the system, and the COVID is a stress test, and it'll go away. But there'll be some things that are broken for a long time, and then there's some things that are profoundly changed. I think, first of all, the financial gaps between entities is clear. The rich, the poor, those who have good income statements and good balance sheets, and those has been a defining characteristics. Some of those will be broken, and it has enormous political consequences the left and the right will be, I think, in greater conflict. And so that issue has also been connected to the changes in money and credit that Ann was referring to. In other words, before that, interest rates hit zero and there was not classic monetary policy. And also when there was QE, it didn't pass through to those who needed the money the most. What we now had was we're in a new era in which there's going to be government borrowing money and directing that money more than the normal capital markets, and central banks buying money. And that is going to have a profound impact on the value of money, probably reserve currencies and so on. And then related to that is it's a defining moment in terms of the strong and the weak, which, for example, China has come out of this very well, and it's going to change the nature of capital flows, I think. So I think that those are the main. It'll have political and wealth implications that will be very important and will be clarified over the next, I think, 2 years.
All three of you have touched on the macro impact of the pandemic, and I'm delighted about that because I want to delve into that more deeply. But before we go there, I'm curious. Every company has been forced to adapt over the past 9, 10, 11 months, and many CEOs are pleasantly surprised by the results of that adaptation. Briefly from each of you, I'd like to know, what one change have you made because of the pandemic that will become a permanent part of the way that you do business? Ann?
Well, I suppose the most significant is that we've realized that we don't need people to be in the office all day, every day. And so we're moving to rolling out, we call it dynamic working, but we're moving to rolling out a much more flexible approach to who comes into the office, when they come into the office, what they come into the office to do. And we've learned that actually we can focus on the output rather than the input and get really, really good results. I mean, in some instances, we've seen operating data actually improve through this, which is just not what you would expect. So I think that's what I would highlight from us. It's the flexibility which we have, where and when and why do we come to work.
Ray, how about you at Bridgewater? Any one thing that you've done differently as a result that you think is going to stick?
Well, we do have the locations and the digital part of it, but I think I'm a global macro investor, all of the liquid markets in the world, basically. And to use this as an opportunity to about differentiation and diversification of our portfolios to make sure that those kinds of surprises and those kinds of differentiations are reflected in our portfolios.
And Anna, quickly from you as well, one thing that Santander is doing differently now that will stay, that will become a permanent part of the way it does business?
So it's a very important change in the way we manage the pandemic. We didn't have somebody to manage a health crisis, which has a huge impact on our business, which extends horizontally across the company from health to employee safety, technology, customers, public policy. So we organized in a different way. I appointed a business leader to be the head of COVID. He still is. He's the head of our wealth management division. And he created a very specialized group across the whole world. And I think this is a huge lesson and something we're going to repeat and do again. We don't need to be just organized the same way all the time. We can have a much more flexible, way of getting things done, much more effective. And this, I'm sure for many companies that are startups and smaller, is maybe what they do already. For us, it's been an eye-opener that we can manage the business in a different way and do it very effectively. Within 15 days, we had 130,000 people from Brazil to Poland to the US working from home. We were able to help communities to source health materials, and all of that with a very different organization from what is usual for us. So this is very important for us as a company.
The title of our panel posits, not unreasonably, I would say, that we've entered a new world order. And Anne, you already touched on it with debt burdens. Anna, you spoke about it in terms of the awareness of climate change and how there are similarities between that and the pandemic. And Ray, of course, you talked about how governments are going to have to finance themselves. I'd like to quote my colleagues Tom Orlik and Bjorn van Rooij, because this is how they put this idea of a new order last week. They said the center of economic gravity is shifting from west to east, from advanced economies to emerging markets, from free markets to state controls, and from established democracies to authoritarian and populist rulers. I want to know from all three of you what you think the new order will be. Are Tom and Bjorn right, or will things play out differently? Ray, this is your wheelhouse. As you look out into the next 5 years, maybe beyond that, give me your macro framework.
I think that this is a good summary. I think when I look at history, I've studied the rise and decline of reserve currencies over the last 500 years. And this is a moment of a change in the world order, very similar to that which happened prior to World War I, prior to World War II. An analogous period. There's large wealth gaps and income gaps and opportunity gaps that exist. There's no time that has been this large since the 1930s. At the same time, monetary and policy and debt policies in which when you have a zero interest rate, there needs to be the expansion of debt and that monetization of debt. That last time that happened like this to this grade was 1930 to 45 period. And the rising power of China, challenging an existing power in its competitions. The last time that existed was in the 1930s to 45 period. There are struggles, fights over wealth and political power within countries and then between countries. That confrontation, that issue about how to deal with that whether it's in a peaceful way or in a confrontational way, within countries, like our political divide and our social divide that exists in the United States and in many countries, or between countries, such as the conflicts that exist between the United States world order and the Chinese rise, in which there's conflicts. There's a trade war, a technology war, a geopolitical war, and even a capital war now, and then there's military conflict. We, I believe, are coming into a more challenging environment because of the nature of how this happens over and over again through history in these cycles. So I believe that your summary at the beginning was apt.
And do you share Ray's view? Growing divide, more confrontation, a more challenging environment. Do you see things differently?
So look, I think that is a completely credible path and a completely credible set of, it is one route that we unquestionably could go down. But I think it's also worth focusing on where are the points of shared interest, where are the points of commonality. You know, China in itself has more than 1 billion people with 1 billion different views of what their future should look like, just like America, just like Europe. Everybody has their own view of where they expect to share and what share they feel they ought to get in a size of the pie. But if we can increase the size of the pie, it is better for everybody. So I think it is more constructive, and this is where I hope that we will get to focus on where there are common interests and get back to a more multilateral approach to trying to solve those interests. And climate change is dealing with the climate, dealing with the environment. That's an absolutely classic place where actually humanity has shared interests, regardless of which side of the Pacific or which side of the Atlantic you're on. And yet we lost a little bit of that shared goal. So I think the opportunity for us now is to focus on where there is a common ground, where there is a common interest. But will be all too easy for us to slip into the scenario that Ray outlined, which is to focus on the differences. And I think that would be a really regressive step.
I want to so agree with Anne and say that I think that this is a defining moment of how we're going to be with each other, internally within countries and externally. But we're still going to have to face the problems of how do you create money and credit, and how do you get it into the hands of those people who need it most. So yeah, I think that the summary is completely right, and I hope that we follow that better direction.
So Anna, your thoughts on this idea of a macro framework as you look out into the future and you're making decisions about how to run your company, what are you anticipating?
So, I mean, Ray and Anne have, I think, said it all, and I agree with everything. I think the key is how do we manage the distributional impact of this crisis? I think that is the key, and it's true for regions, countries, sectors, and people. Because other than that, the structural trends we're seeing are the same as pre-pandemic. They're just accelerating and have accelerated at an exponential pace. So how do we deal with those most affected by the pandemic? Because this is really going to make things worse than they were before. The differences that have been alluded to. Monetary policy obviously benefits those that already have financial assets. So I go back to, we do need, I call it a new social contract. What is the new governance of governments and the world? And the key here is that we put fairness and a focus on adaptation and social resilience at the heart, because the economic terms have to be based on fair competition, fair taxation, and distribution efficiency. We need to really together build a more inclusive and sustainable recovery, the building back better idea that has been said many times. And I really believe we need to get public and private sector together. I mean, governments have done the best they could, but in most cases, they were not ready. They didn't have the governance, the leadership to actually deal with this in the same way we did. We've heard from Anne and other companies. We put together teams in 2 weeks. We had leadership where we didn't have it before. We had a plan, we executed. So as we think about the new world, and it is a new world that we are already in, working together, private and public sector, is key. Otherwise, we're going to go down a very bumpy road. And I think there is a real risk of that happening because the digital economy is a very different world from what we had before, and it's accelerated. So again, putting fairness, social resilience at the heart, collaboration, to me, those are the key concepts as we build this new world.
Let me stay with you, Anna, because I'd like to understand a bit more about how you adapt to that environment that you and Ray and Anne have articulated. Santander has a big footprint, a big geographic footprint. If my colleagues Tom and Bjorn are right, and there's a pivot from developed markets to emerging markets, is that something that you chase? You don't have to chase it very hard because you're already in emerging markets, but I'm curious to know what kind of strategic impact or strategic adaptation you make to adjust to this new reality.
So look, I'm actually just back from my first trip since February to the United States. I was in Boston, New York, and I was in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. Santander today, 40% of our earnings come from Latin America, with only 13% of our loans. There's a huge potential for growth in the areas of emerging markets that we know well, and we have great talent. So we are going to adapt our strategy, and we announced this a few months ago. We are working along 3 lines. One is what we call the One Santander. We need to become much more efficient, especially in Europe. We need to manage as one entity, not 4 or 5 or 10 different countries. The second is around payments. We're building, again, we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years, but we're going to bring it all together. We just announced the acquisition of the Wirecard assets in Germany this morning or last night. We're going to build around GetNet, a Brazilian company, which is one of the leaders in payments. And we're going to build around Open Bank, which is a fully native digital bank, and our consumer business in Europe. So what we're going to do is what our consumers, our customers are asking. They want to deal with us more online. I said it before, 50% across the group of all the products we sell in the month of October were sold online. So we need to rethink how we service consumers and how we also organize ourselves, taking the lessons we've learned during the pandemic. And this is true for all companies in all sectors. And
how about you, adapting to the new world order? other companies in your industry have chosen to go down the consolidation route. And that may not be exclusively because of the pandemic. There are all kinds of other factors, let's say, or variables involved in that equation. But is that how you adapt, or do you adapt differently?
I mean, we've been a company. I mean, we've made acquisitions from time to time, but our growth has largely been organic, and I doubt very much that will change. We see bolt-ons that we can bring into the business, but for us, the core of our investment proposition has very much been driven off of our own research base. And I think that is going to continue to be the case. I mean, we've actually had, in terms of flows and in terms of business performance, we've had a great year this year, which is not where we necessarily expected to be back in March. So we see that there is consolidation going around about us, consolidation in the asset management industry. You know, it's tough to get right. You can get it right, but it more go wrong than go right. So I think we prefer to stay on our own, with our own strategy and build that out organically and with patience, which is what we've always done. But we are lucky in that we have a very broad international footprint. We are present in, as I said, more than 25 countries around the world. So for us, the imperative and the need to fill in some of the gaps is maybe less strong than others in the industry, and we're happy to continue on our organic route.
Anna, same question to you. There's more consolidation in banking than we've seen in some time. What's driving it? Will it continue? Will Santander participate? Is that part of your adaptation strategy?
So we're much more likely to continue buying technology platforms or add-on acquisitions. We did Ebury, a fintech in London last year. Actually, we closed this year. Card. We're investing in startups in Brazil across our footprint. We serve today 145 million customers worldwide, more than any bank in the Western Hemisphere. So this has huge potential for very significant organic value creation. And our vision is to be the best open financial services platform on the market. And what we want to make sure is that the structural changes that we have made, I described before, which is the One Santander, the global digital bank, and our payments platform, will help us drive greater and profitable sustainable growth. So no, we're not about to participate in any, let's say, traditional bank consolidation. We don't believe that is the right thing for us at the moment.
Now, Ray, you touched on this idea of adaptation before. You talked about the need to diversify. You were speaking about the investments, I presume, that Bridgewater is making. Could you give us a little more on that idea? How does Bridgewater adapt to the new world order that you've been thinking about for a long time, I should add? Anybody who is familiar with your writing and your speaking knows that. So I presume that some of the things that you're doing have been in the works for a little while, but nevertheless, here we are, in November 2020, and it's a different place than we were 11 months ago.
To answer your question, there's a business answer to the question, how do we operate business-wise and also portfolio? I'd like to emphasize the portfolio because I think that's probably most relevant to other people. There's a period of, I think, great uncertainty and great risk. And so I think there are three words, diversification, liquidity, and then differentiation. We want to make sure that our investors are not just concentrated in some of the traditional markets. So diversification of how to do that well can reduce risk without reducing opportunity, and that means currency diversification, including the reserve currencies, how much exposure is to the reserve currencies, but it means currency diversification, asset class diversification, country diversification, and that should be the starting point of portfolios. In terms of liquidity, it allows you the flexibility to change as circumstances change. And differentiation is the most important consideration now. There are two different worlds. There are worlds that will be orderly and will prosper in this kind of an environment, and you could see it. And that differentiation versus other worlds and markets related to that that will be bankrupt and disorderly. That kind of differentiation is important. As far as the business goes, we have the different location considerations and long relationships that we're building on.
Ray, I'm going to ask you to continue because you just said something that at the very least interested me, this idea of bankruptcy and disorderliness. Where do you see that?
Well, you could see it. It's reflected in the income statements and balance sheet. Every individual, every company, every country they're good. How well they are depends on how much their income is relative to their expenses and how much their assets are relative to their liabilities. So you can see radical differences in the financial consequences of that. Second, the ability, the proximity to those who are printing and distributing money. Are you a recipient of that? For example, a lot of the third world is not a recipient of that and is not in good financial situations. And then there's order, political and also social order. So when you could see it differentiated in the countries that are controlling the virus and behaving orderly and well together. So you could see those differentiations reflected in the market's behavior, and you can also see it reflected in the political and social conditions.
Well, we know that markets are discounting mechanisms, Ray. I don't need to tell you interest rates at zero, but I'll remind everybody that stocks keep rising to new records, and not just here in the United States, but globally. PE ratios haven't been this high since the dot-com era. The dollar, to your point about currencies, Ray, has slumped to a 2.5-year low. Do asset prices and valuations make sense given the economic fundamentals, some of which we've talked about here in this panel discussion, and for that matter, the policy outlook and what we can expect from a Biden administration? Ray, what do you think?
When we look at interest rate markets, we look at the earnings yield. When we look at stocks, and we look at PEs, they're basically yields. And the capacity of central banks to print money and buy financial assets has essentially led the bond market to go to multiples that are somewhere between 100 times. You put a dollar out and you'll get your money back in 100 years. It's because of the nature of, so it's as 100-time multiple. You have to compare stock multiples to bond multiples. And so the capacity of central banks to put liquidity into the system and to have that liquidity go to produce high multiples is very real. It also changes the economics of borrowing. In other words, if you can find something that makes anything more than a zero, or they're going to make money. So that encourages the leveraging and the changes. So the financial flows that we're seeing, the market behavior is reflective of that. In my opinion, don't own bonds and don't own cash because they're producing a lot of debt and producing a lot of money to fund it. And so that's changing the nature of capital flows. It's also changing how those flows go to China in terms of the comparison of that market, particularly as it opens up. So I think it's behaving sensibly, but don't use old multiples as reflections of the limitations of what's expensive.
Ann Richards, does that make sense to you? Throw out the old orthodoxy. The fact that we have zero interest rates is changing the way that you need to think about multiples and valuations on assets?
Of course it does. We've never been in a situation where, for this length of time, we have had effectively free money, or it's completely shifted the relative valuation of assets and how you come up to an establishment of what a fair asset is. And I think when you look at the level of indebtedness that we've talked about, this ability to use the central bank balance sheet as a massive buffer to manipulate the price of that money, that experiment has taken us into far further reaches than we ever and arguably successfully in many respects than you ever imagined was possible. But there are consequences. The gaps that Ray mentioned earlier about, the fairness gaps. And by the way, I would add one that he didn't mention, which is it's been very easy for large companies to re-equitize themselves. It's been much tougher for small companies to do the same thing. They have been left with proportionately higher levels of indebtedness. And I think that is a potential problem for the recovery, which we need to address. But essentially, when you've got this level of indebtedness, you've got a number of choices. You can grow your way out of it, you can inflate your way out of it, or you can default your way out of it. And there are choices in which route you follow down that. And this is where I think we come put all the way back to sustainable capitalism, because if we want to be successful and avoid the disorderly disintegration of bond markets, we have to think about how we use this free money to invest in job creation, in productive capacity, useful productivity improvements, which ultimately get us on to a positive path for the economy as a whole. And this is a choice. If we waste this opportunity, if we waste the free money, if it only goes into financial asset inflation, then we will have a very large reckoning down the line. So again, I think there is a choice to be had here, and we really hope we make the right choice here.
And there's going to be a new president in the White House on January the 20th. Does anything of what you've said, or perhaps what Ray sketched out as well, because you're broadly in agreement on many of those points, change under a Biden administration?
I think you will see an increased willingness to engage in a multilateral basis, which I think will be helpful in some of the issues that we're talking about. And I think the likelihood of a split Congress means that perhaps some of the more radical and larger fiscal packages which were talked about are perhaps a little less likely than we were. So I think that multilateral approach will be the single biggest change that we see, and perhaps the tone, obviously, of some of the communications. And I think we may see some interesting conversations around large tech and just what the roles and responsibilities of large tech are. They've been part of the solution this year, but also I think there is a sense that concentration of power gives them great leverage. And maybe we need to think about a better framework and a better multilateral framework for them to operate within.
Anna, quickly from you, zero interest rates may have been a boon to stock market investors. They're not the world's greatest things for bankers. Tell me how you're adapting to that reality, and maybe touch on a little bit of what Anne spoke to in terms of what changes we might look toward in the global dynamic under a Biden presidency.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is that as far as not just Biden presidency, I think this is the case for Europe and countries that actually can do this, is that we should not withdraw support prematurely. It's like, closing your checkbook during a war or something like this. So we need to continue with government support for the small and medium-sized companies and those that have lost jobs and so on. So this is super important. In terms of the U.S., I think the U.S., like the world, has a complex situation, and I think we need to come together and work together to grow out of this in the right way. And this is really the main task all of us in the private and public sectors have ahead of us. For banks in particular, the low interest rate environment obviously is not ideal, but I think it's also a huge opportunity to change and reinvent ourselves like we are doing. Ray mentioned something hugely important, how efficient you are. We continue to have a 47% cost income. This is the best defense: growth, growing the top line, and being very efficient. Same thing for governments, and do that in a sustainable way.
Anna, Anne, Ray, I'd like to thank all three of you. Great conversation, and great to see all of you.
Thank you.
All right, Eric, thank you so much. And next up is a conversation with Christine Lagarde, President of the European Central Bank, moderated by Francine Lacroix, anchor of Bloomberg Television.
What a great pleasure to be here with Christine Lagarde, the President of the European Central Bank, and welcome, President, to the New Economy Forum. Bloomberg. I have to start where everyone is talking about the vaccine. How will it actually change your forecast, and how will it change this economy if we do get a working vaccine early next year?
Well, it's lovely to see you, Francine, and to participate. To your question, I'm not sure that it's going to be a major game changer for our forecast, simply because what we had anticipated in our baseline was that at some stage in the first half of 2021, there would be a vaccine and that it would be rolled out in the course of 2021. So it might be a little bit accelerated, given the news that we're receiving from the various horizons, Germany, US, but I don't think that is going to be a game changer, so to speak. I think that our forecast is being revisited almost as we speak, and we will be releasing on the 10th of December. So I don't want to anticipate what the outcome will be. But, we've seen, before we had this great news about vaccines, we had some pretty negative news concerning the second wave that really came about certainly earlier than anything we had anticipated. And together with that second wave, we have also that list of containment measures and lockdown measures that have affected one country after the other in the euro area. So we had a combination of those sort of developments that affected negatively the situation, and that also has an impact on the outlook.
So what kind of economy do you see for Europe and the world because of the extra restrictions? Is it, a double dip? Is it something that is so uncertain at the moment because even if we get a vaccine, we don't exactly know what shape it will take or how consumers will behave?
I don't want to downplay the very good news that the vaccines were, but I think that, as a central bank, we have to be mindful of not just the short term and the news impact. We have to be mindful of the overall situation. And in that vein, I think that the second wave that we saw presents risks. The first risk that I would think of is the fact that consumers, investors, employers do not regard the pandemic as a one-off, this V-shape that we all aspired to, but as something that will recur over the course of time, and as a result would lead them to completely change their behavior. In other words, how about if they start saving again for precautionary purposes? How about if they continue to freeze and hold their investment plans because of the uncertainty generated by this situation? And the second risk that I see is the potential real/financial spillover, which we have managed to avoid so far. So in other words, we have not had the financial sector amplifying the downside that has weighed on the real economy, and we need to really stay clear of that because that would be an aggravating factor.
What surprised you the most in the economy in Europe, but also worldwide, given the pandemic? Is it wages? Is it productivity? Is it how quickly people actually started working again when some of these lockdowns were lifted?
What surprised me most from this part of the world where I have relocated is, how in the face of this massive, exogenous, symmetric shock, all European players, upped their game. And I think that we were first out of the gate, putting together a very large package in the first half of March. And we were soon followed by the European Commission, the decision to apply the escape clause, the decision to remove the state aid restrictions, the decision then to put on the table a massive package that was agreed in July. That surprised me because I had gone through a lot of procrastination and laborious process back 10 years ago. And the speed at which we moved certainly surprised me. And that was a strong encouragement in working together, which we did.
President Lagarde, you've been pretty blunt about using asset purchases, but also long-term loans. And this would be to provide stimulus in December. Which is your preferred tool?
Back in March, we decided to actually use two key tools. One that was specially designed for the exceptional circumstances that started hitting us, and that was the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program. And the second one, which was not as innovative, because there had been longer term refinancing operations, but certainly we changed the terms. We focused particularly on making sure that the credit channels would stay open and would continue to flow credit to the economy. So we had those two tools that were intended, first of all, to make sure that we would stabilize financing and that we would make sure that credit was stable, and the second, which was really intended to put liquidity and to make sure that it was largely available for the entrepreneurs, for the households, and that would sustain the economy despite the heavy shock. So those were the key tools, added with relaxation on the collateral front in order to have an enlarged pool of collateral to draw from. Those tools were extremely helpful and came on the back of an existing situation, which all you listeners, I'm sure, know better. Now, clearly, going forward, as we have indicated after the last Monetary Policy Governing Council, we will be prepared to recalibrate in order to face the situation and the second wave. And I have indicated last week that just as PEP and TLTROs, which are the two tools that I have just described, had been efficient in mid-March, and then later on in June when we recalibrated PEP and increased its volume and extended its maturity, that those tools would be certainly regarded as essential, but that everything would be debated, and this recalibration and this dynamic recalibration would be discussed in the Governing Council.
So, President, given what you just said and also your speeches in the past, because the duration of the support is so important, does it mean, is it your way of signaling basically that there could be stimulus extended for longer than the market currently expects?
Faustin, I think what is really important is that we make sure that the financing conditions are stable, are conducive to economic recovery as it comes, and that economic operators not only know that the level of financing is going to be there, but that it will be available for a period of time that will last long enough to actually cover the period during which the pandemic and the various waves will affect the economy. And as we are likely to foresee that second wave affecting the economy well into 2021, we will be looking at all these options, which have to do with levels, which have to do with duration, and which will take into account the specific benefits of the tools that we have and that we have used to good effect under the exceptional circumstances that we faced in March and that we are still facing today.
Last week, you gave a pretty powerful speech about coordination between monetary policy and fiscal policy. How confident are you that the message was received and actually a lot more can be done?
I think what has really been extraordinary during that crisis since March is how fiscal actually operated fast and big and focused. And I think what is remarkable is that the first package of 540 billion was rapidly agreed and has already been rolled out. And I'm here referring to the SURE pillar of that first set of supports that were agreed by the European Council, and how this additional one, the Next Generation EU, which combines clearly the MFF for a period of years and then the Recovery and Resilience Fund that will also be effective for a period of time, how that actually was combined together with the monetary support that our monetary policy provided. And it's not a question of one leading over the other or who was first off the gate, but it's a question of how we were capable of supporting on the monetary front and how fiscal was able to give a very strong message. And the joint borrowing is a clear, strong message that Europe is together on that, and that the fiscal arm can actually operate in a much more targeted and much more efficient way in that regard, given that the recovery was anything but solid, consistent, and even. It was uneven, it was fragmented, it was incomplete. And the fiscal arm in that regard is clearly operating to better effect than the monetary arm, which has to be around and supportive, though.
Madame Lagarde, you've been in charge for just over a year, and in that we've had a pandemic. I mean, we've had quite a lot going on. What surprised you the most about the European economy or European institutions trying to come together to actually find a solution?
There are certain things that didn't change. I would say the long nights, to a degree, the laborious process that it takes. But what surprised me was, nonetheless, the efficiency that was developed amongst 27 member states with 27 sovereignty, and this sort of understanding that we had to face the situation all together. There were some, hiccups in the early days, but frankly, that was overcome on all fronts. And I think that the sort of coming together of Europe at that point in time was, in my view, exceptional.
Does climate reporting for companies actually be mandatory?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of what you said.
So I was going to ask about climate change. I know you've been one of the biggest proponents of sustainability and trying to, get companies to do better. But does disclosure have to be mandatory if we're going to see real change?
This is a personal position, not the ECB, but I think disclosure should indeed be mandatory. And I'm very, very pleased to see how progress is being made in terms of reporting requirements, in terms of harmonization of principles, the way in which the IFRS is coming on board, the way in which the accounting firms are moving along, and the NGFS, which is this network for the greening of finance, which is a club of central banks in many ways, is also largely involved in that respect. And I'm really pleased that the chair of that network is actually going to join the executive board of the ECB as early as January 1st. So it will certainly reinforce, our capacity to analyze and to mobilize us to see where, with our objective of price stability, we can actually include the climate change imperatives in both how we measure price and inflation, how we define the room that we have depending on where the natural interest rate is moving as a result of climate change, and how we can better analyze the situation as a result of the climate change impact.
Do you think that climate change, yeah, but actually it's being done at quite a rapid pace. Is this the good thing that comes out of the COVID pandemic, that actually a lot more has been done on green sustainability?
I think in many ways the COVID-19 has accelerated trends that were there, that were latent or that were slow moving. And certainly the momentum about climate change, the impact it has, the imperative to participate in whichever capacity and within the remit of our respective mandates, that has been accelerated. I have no doubt about it. And in a way, that's a blessing in disguise.
Do you think that the mandate for central banks to only focus on inflation is now too narrow, given everything that's happening around us?
Well, our mandate here at the ECB is not inflation, it's price stability. And I think that we have to be smart about the components that go into price stability and how we define inflation, how we analyze the situation, how we determine the room that we have to maneuver. So all of that requires that we have a larger horizon than simply looking at harmonized index consumer prices. Clearly, that could be a measurement. That might be the measurement. It's something that we will be debating as part of our strategy review. But price stability comprises a lot more than just that. And I hope we can explore all that as part of our strategy review in the weeks to come.
what's your central expectation for 2021? Are things going to get better? For maybe multilateralism is back, maybe U.S.-China, the relations get a little bit better, or is there a danger of a second wave getting bigger, a third wave? It seems that it's very binary at the moment. How do you view the world?
If I would suspect that we will have a little less uncertainty than what we had in 2020. I would hope that progress, technology, biotechnologies, discoveries are going to help going forward. But I still believe that 2021 is going to be a difficult, certainly first half of the year, and that we will not have caught up with where we were pre-pandemic before the end of the year.
Christine Lagarde, thank you so much for joining us today. That was, of course, the president of the European Central Bank.
Thank you.
All right, Francine, thank you so much. And I think one of the key takeaways of that conversation. All right, Francine, thank you so much. And I think one of the key takeaways at the beginning of that conversation, something Christine Lagarde said about how we've been able to avoid a financial spillover, and it's something that we need to make sure we continue to do so. All right, we're going to switch gears for a moment. We've actually got our second moment of culture, and it features the Dance Theater of Harlem. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for part one of the second day of our 2020 Bloomberg New Economy Forum. Be sure to come back for part two of our Cities program this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My colleague Scarlett Fu will guide you through the next session of the Cities Pillar. Be well, everyone, and thanks again for joining us today.